Florence, 15th century. The city sleeps beneath a velvet sky, its narrow streets lit only by the soft flicker of torches swaying in the night air. Stone walls rise tall and silent, their shadows stretching long and heavy across cobbled alleys where whispers seem to linger longer than footsteps. Within these walls the world is changing. Painters, mathematicians, engineers, and philosophers move as quietly as priests at prayer, carrying with them an energy that feels at once dangerous and divine. This is the Renaissance, the rebirth of Vinci. Light after centuries of darkness, a time when art and science, faith and doubt walk side by side. Florence glows with brilliance on the surface, but beneath that glow lies something more unsettling. Hidden codes, guarded secrets, forbidden truth, carefully woven into words, manuscripts, and the brushstrokes of paintings that, even today, we do not fully understand. At the center of this labyrinth of shadows and light stands a man whose name is known to all, but whose truths are known to none. Leonardo da Vinci emerges not as the familiar face of genius we are taught in school, but as a riddle in human form. He is more than a painter, more than an inventor, more than a dreamer. He is an enigma who paints worlds within worlds, symbols within symbols. His canvases smile at us while concealing something else entirely. His sketches reveal inventions centuries ahead of their time, yet often obscured with deliberate flaws, as though knowledge was too sharp a blade to be handed freely to men. His notebooks are written in reverse, as if intended only for mirrors, or perhaps for the eyes of the future rather than his contemporaries. Around him, the Renaissance thrums like a heartbeat, but Leonardo seems to walk slightly apart, seeing and recording what others do not dare to notice. We often imagine the Renaissance as golden and beautiful, filled with music and cathedrals, with marble statues gleaming in candlelight. Yet, for those who lived within it, the air was thick with tension. The church's shadow stretched long over every thought. To ask the wrong question was to risk your life. To write too openly was to invite condemnation, censorship, or worse, silence, enforced by fire. Within this delicate balance, Leonardo learned to see the world differently. His curiosity was boundless, but his caution was equal to it. Perhaps that is why his works carry two layers, one for the public eye and another for the hidden reader, the secret observer, the seeker who understands that meaning is not always given, but must be uncovered. Consider for a moment the Mona Lisa. To the casual viewer, she is a portrait of a woman with a faint, mysterious smile. But to those who linger, who lean closer, who peer into her eyes and the faint details of her landscape, she becomes something more. A map, a puzzle, a door. The painting does not reveal, it conceals. The same could be said for the Last Supper. Its apostles appear frozen in a moment of shock and conversation, but the gestures of their hands seem to trace a silent language. The missing chalice, the strange spacing, the geometry of the scene all suggest an intention that runs deeper than mere decoration. These are not accidents of composition. They are whispers, carefully placed. So why would Leonardo do this? Why would a man of such extraordinary gifts choose to cloak his discoveries in riddles, his knowledge in puzzles, his truth in silence? Some say it was fear. Fear of the church, fear of power, fear of a society not yet ready to hold such knowledge. Others suggest pride, a desire to leave a challenge for future generations, a breadcrumb trail of symbols that would ensure his legacy endured not just in art, but in mystery. And some whisper of something darker still, that Leonardo was part of hidden orders, societies sworn to protect dangerous truths, ancient knowledge carried forward beneath layers of allegory and code. This introduction is not simply about setting a stage. It is about inviting you into a labyrinth. Over the next 15 chapters, we will peel back the layers of Da Vinci's life and works. We will wander his streets, turn the pages of his mirrored notebooks, linger before his paintings and trace the patterns of his geometry. We will ask questions that history textbooks do not ask, questions that professional scholars often avoid. Who was Leonardo speaking to? What truths was he encoding? And why even now do historians step carefully around the edges of certain interpretations, as though the past still has the power to burn those who look too closely? the narration slow-sheer, calming, bedtime-like, almost hypnotic. It is as though we are being lulled into a dream of Florence, of candlelit rooms, of shadows bending across unfinished canvases. But beneath that calm is a pulse, an unease, a quiet weight. Because once you begin to look at Leonardo's work through this lens, the ordinary dissolves. Every brushstroke becomes a cipher, every figure becomes a messenger, every silence becomes scream. And the danger is not that we will find nothing, but that we will find too much. As you listen, imagine yourself walking through a darkened gallery after midnight. The Mona Lisa hangs before you. The room isolent, but her smile feels alive. You take a step closer and the air changes. It feels as though she has been waiting, not for centuries, but for you. Across the room, the Last Supper stretches across its wall, the apostles caught in eternal conversation. Their frozen gestures almost seem to shift when you are not looking directly at them. Behind you, the Vitruvian Man hovers on parchment, not simply a study of anatomy, but a diagram of existence, a map of body and cosmos intertwined. Suddenly, the idea of hidden codes does not feel so far-fetched. Suddenly, the familiar has become strange. This is the heart of the mystery. Leonardo da Vinci did not simply create works of beauty. He created vaults. He built chambers within. His paintings, locks within his drawings, mirrors within his words. He was not only asking questions, he was daring us to ask them too. And 5 centuries later, we are still standing before the locked doors he left behind, our hands hovering, uncertain, but unable to turn away. The introduction closes with a quiet challenge. By the end of this journey, you may never see Da Vinci's works the same way again. What was once familiar will become alien, what was once simple will seem impossibly complex, and what was once silent will whisper in your ear long after the lights have gone out. Da Vinci is not asking us to admire him, he is asking us to listen, carefully, patiently, and without fear, for the whispers in the canvas are waiting, and they have been waiting for 500 years. Florence in the 15th century was a city of contradictions. By day it glowed like a jewel at the heart of the Renaissance, alive with music, with frescoes blooming across cathedral walls, with sculptors chiseling marble into visions of gods and heroes. But by night, when torches flickered and the streets emptied into silence, Florence seemed to shift. Its beauty no longer glimmered with purity. Instead, it carried a weight, a watchfulness, as if secrets pressed against its stone walls. The city itself seemed to breathe in whispers. Behind every palace window, plots were written on parchment and sealed with wax. Beneath its cobblestones, networks of power moved quietly, hidden from the gaze of the ordinary citizen. Florence was not simply a stage upon which genius unfolded. It was a living organism of secrecy and brilliance, a place where art and danger walked hand in hand. For young Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1452 in the Tuscan countryside, Florence was both a sanctuary and a crucible. When he first arrived as a boy, the city overwhelmed the senses. The clang of hammers rang from blacksmiths' forges, the smoke of tanneries curled through narrow alleys, the perfume of spices drifted from market stalls along the Arno. Churches rose high above the rooftops, their domes commanding the skyline, each a monument to both faith and power. And yet, beneath all of this grandeur, Florence held shadows not visible to the untrained eye. Leonardo, quiet and observant even as a child, seemed instinctively attuned to them. Where others saw only spectacle, he noticed patterns, the geometry of the streets, the rhythm of bells tolling, the way whispers carried in courtyards long after the speakers had gone. Florence in these years was ruled in truth, if not in name, by the Medici, a family of bankers whose wealth was rivaled only by their political cunning. Lorenzo's Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, filled his court with poets, philosophers and painters, turning the city into a garden of human genius. Yet the Medici also knew that art and ideas were not luxuries, they were weapons. To commission a painting, to sponsor a cathedral dome, to protect a philosopher, these were not gestures of kindness. They were moves in a delicate game of power. Florence glittered with beauty because it was useful for Florence to glitter. And beneath the surface of this calculated brilliance, dangerous ideas moved like hidden currents. The Renaissance is often described as a time of freedom and discovery, but it was also a time of immense caution. The Church still loomed like a shadow across Europe, its authority unshaken. To question too loudly was to risk accusation, imprisonment, or worse. Books deemed heretical were burned. Philosophers who strayed too far from the accepted line could vanish into dungeons. In this world, secrecy was survival. Men with ideas beyond their age learned to cloak their truths in allegory, in symbols, in coded letters passed hand to hand. In Florence, knowledge itself was currency, traded like gold and just as carefully guarded. It was in this climate that young Leonardo began to learn. Apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, he entered a workshop that was itself a microcosm of Florence's. Contradictions. Verrocchio's studio was filled with sculpture and paint, with wood and clay, with maps and engineering sketches. Apprentices like Leonardo learned to grind pigments, stretch canvases, carve marble, cast bronze. But they also absorbed something subtler, the understanding that every work carried meaning beyond what was visible. A painting was never just a painting. A statue was never only a form. In the coded language of Renaissance Florence, art spoke in layers, offering one message for the masses and another for the initiated. Leonardo, unusually sensitive and insatiably curious, drank this world in. He sketched the twisting forms of plants, the curves of riverbanks, the muscles of horses, the faces of beggars. To him, nothing was ordinary. Everything held a secret shape, a pattern waiting to be seen. But even as he explored the visible world, he began to sense the invisible structures around him, the politics hidden beneath polite conversation, the unspoken rules dictating what could and could not be said, the danger lurking behind knowledge. Florence was a city where silence could save you, and Leonardo was learning the art of silence. The streets themselves seemed to teach him. By daylight, the Piazza della Signoria was filled with merchants calling out wares, with couriers rushing, letters with painters selling small works to passing nobles. But when night fell, the piazza transformed. Its statues loomed as guardians, the palace windows glowed faintly, and the emptiness felt charged as though unseen watchers lingered in every shadow. The city at night reminded Leonardo that Florence was never entirely what it seemed. There was always another layer, another meaning hidden behind the surface. This truth would become the foundation of his life's work. The visible was never the whole story. In this atmosphere, even knowledge carried risk. Forbidden texts circulated quietly, works of ancient philosophers, medical treatises, ideas too radical for open discussion. A book might pass from hand to hand like contraband, read only in candlelit rooms with doors locked. Leonardo almost certainly encountered such texts, and even if he did not fully grasp their danger as a youth, he would have absorbed the lesson. Ideas are precious, but ideas are perilous. To hold them carelessly is to court destruction. Better to wrap them in riddles, to whisper them rather than shout them, to hide them where only the careful can find them. It is no surprise, then, that Leonardo's own writings would take on a secretive form. From the very beginning, his notebooks bore the signs of caution. He did not write plainly, but in mirror script, letters flowing backward, legible only when viewed through a glass. To some, this was merely habit, perhaps a trick of left-handedness, but to others it was deliberate encryption, a way of shielding his thoughts from casual readers. In a city where ideas could be as dangerous as daggers, perhaps it was safer to write for the mirror than for the man. As Leonardo grew, Florence itself grew more turbulent. The Medici's hold on the city wavered, rival families plotted, and preachers thundered from pulpits about sin and salvation. The streets echoed with both celebration and unrest. Against this backdrop, Leonardo's mind sharpened into its strange shape. He became not only an observer of beauty, but an observer of secrets. He learned to move easily between worlds. The workshop and the palace, the marketplace and the library, the chapel and the back alley where whispers gathered. Florence was teaching him that truth was never singular. It was fractured, coded, hidden, in shadows. The section closes with Leonardo standing at the threshold of his own mystery. He has absorbed the geometry of cathedrals, the politics of Medici courts, the murmurs of forbidden texts. He has watched Florence glitter by day and darken by night. He has learned that every surface hides a depth, every silence hides a voice. As he begins to write in reverse, crafting a mirror world of words, it becomes clear. Leonardo is not only recording knowledge, he is beginning to cloak it, to guard it, to weave it into codes that only the patient and the daring will ever decipher. Florence, Theduel of light wrapped in shadow, has shaped him. It has taught him to hide truths in plain sight, and it is here, in this crucible of brilliance and danger, that the hidden code of Da Vinci first begins to take form. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks remain among the most haunting documents of the Renaissance, not because of what they reveal at first glance, but because of how they resist us, how they seem to withhold themselves, even as we read them. Page after page is filled with sketches of flying machines, of muscles peeled open like pages of a book, of rivers twisting in spirals, of strange beasts half-remembered from myth and half-born from his imagination. But what unsettles us most are not the images, it is the words. The lines of script do not run as saws do. They flow backward, curling from right to left, every letter reversed as though reality itself had been turned to glass. Hold a page before a mirror, and suddenly the words awaken, revealing sentences that had been there all along yet invisible to the naked eye. This is Leonardo's handwriting, his voice across centuries, but only if one dares to look through the mirror. Why did he write this way? That question has lingered for 500 years. Some argue it was mere convenience. Leonardo, left-handed, found it easier to pull his quill across the page from right to left than to smudge the ink dragging from left to right. To write backward, they say, was no different from a carpenter choosing a tool suited to his hand. And yet the explanation feels thin, for the habit was not occasional, it was constant, deliberate, obsessive. His thousands of pages, scattered now across museums and private collections, nearly all bear this mirrored script. Such devotion suggests not mere practicality, but intention. Something in Leonardo wanted his words to be hidden, to be cloaked, until sought out with effort. Others see in the mirror writing a form of encryption, a shield against prying eyes. In Renaissance Italy, knowledge could be dangerous. Anatomical study, for instance, risked accusations of desecration, even heresy. Philosophical speculation could offend the church. Engineering designs might be coveted by rivals or stolen by states hungry for weapons. To write openly was to invite scrutiny, and scrutiny could be fatal. Perhaps Leonardo, always aware of the precarious balance between genius and peril, chose to veil his thoughts, so that only those determined enough to look closer could glimpse what he saw. His mirror script was not impenetrable, but it was enough to discourage the casual reader. Enough to say, these words are not for everyone. There is also something more poetic, more unsettling about the mirrored text. To look at Leonardo's notebooks is to feel as though one is peering into an alternate world, a reflection of our own where everything is reversed. The words move in a direction our eyes resist, forcing us to pause, to reorient, to see language itself as unfamiliar. It is as though Leonardo wrote not for us, but for another world, one that could only be reached through reflection. To write in mirror script is to embrace duality, truth hidden within truth, meaning hidden within form. The page becomes not only a record of thought but a code, a cipher, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Consider what those mirrored words contain. On one page, a sketch of a flying machine spreads its wings like a bat, accompanied by notes explaining airflow and balance. On another, a human skull is sliced in sections, labeled with precise details of bone and vein. Elsewhere, a drawing of a fetus in the womb lies surrounded by notes on reproduction, observations centuries ahead of accepted knowledge. To write such things openly in 15th century Florence would have been reckless. The Church, with its rigid doctrines, did not look kindly on dissections nor on machines that hinted at human conquest of the skies. Knowledge in Leonardo's time was not a neutral thing. It was a fire that could illuminate or burn, and one carried it at great risk. Perhaps Leonardo knew this, and so he wrote backward, so that his notebooks would not be read by chance, but only by those who earned their way into his trust. And yet it is not only danger that lingers in these pages. There is playfulness too. Leonardo loved puzzles, loved to twist meaning into riddles. To him, the act of writing in reverse may have been a game as much as a safeguard, a private amusement, a way of keeping his thoughts his own until he chose to share them. We must remember, secrecy can be joy as well as caution. A hidden word has a certain magic. To reveal it requires discovery, and discovery is a form of intimacy. Perhaps Leonardo delighted in the thought that centuries later, strangers would lean over his notebooks with mirrors, their brows furrowed, chasing after him through reversed lines. In this way, he controls us still, bending us into the rhythm of his thought, forcing us to look as he looked, not directly, but obliquely, through reflection. But if mirror writing kept his words private, what of his images? Our sketch cannot be reversed, cannot be concealed in the same way. Yet Leonardo often wove secrets into his drawings, just as surely as into his mirrored text. A design for a war machine might look like a fantastical toy until studied closely. An anatomical drawing might appear as a scientific diagram, but contain observations that challenge the accepted wisdom of physicians. Even his paintings, meant for public eyes, may have carried whispers hidden in gestures, in backgrounds, in proportions that echoed sacred geometries. His mirror script teaches us this. Leonardo was a man who layered meaning, who never gave the whole truth at once. What he hid in his words might he also have hidden in his art. The unsettling beauty of his backward writing lies in its refusal to give itself easily. It demands patience, humility, and attention, the very virtues Leonardo himself embodied. To read his notes, we must slow down, we must see differently, we must step into his rhythm. And perhaps this is the lesson. Knowledge is not for the careless. Knowledge requires effort, reflection, a willingness to look twice. Leonardo's mirror is not only a trick of the hand, it is a philosophy. It tells us that truth itself is mirrored. Never direct, never simple. To reach it, we must reverse our gaze. Imagine him late at night, candlelight flickering, the scratch of his pen across paper. He leans over a notebook, his hand moving swiftly, words flowing in mirrored lines. Around him, Florence sleeps. Outside, the bells of a monastery toll the hour. He writes quickly, urgently, as though afraid the ideas might escape if not captured. He sketches a gear, a spiral, a bird's wing. He writes in code, not because he wishes never to be understood, but because he understands too well the world in which he lives. He knows that truth must sometimes disguise itself in order to survive. His pages are vaults and mirror writing is the lock. 5 centuries later, we sit with those vaults open before us, mirrors in hand. We decipher his words, but still they resist us. For even when translated, even when printed in clear type, Leonardo's notes are never simple. They wander, they leap, they circle back. They reveal and conceal in the same breath. Reading them feels less like learning facts than like entering a labyrinth built of thought. And perhaps that washes intention. A labyrinth protects its center. To reach it, one must lose oneself. The section closes with a question that lingers like an echo in the mind. If Leonardo da Vinci encrypted his thoughts in writing, hiding knowledge within mirrored script, what might he have hidden in his art? The works meant not for notebooks, but for the eyes of the world. What secrets lie within the brushstrokes of the Mona Lisa, within the angles of the Last Supper, within the shadows and proportions that seem too precise, too deliberate to be chance? His mirror script was a code of words. Might his paintings be codes of images? To follow this thought is to step deeper into the mystery, moving from text into geometry, from mirrored letters into divine ratios, where numbers themselves may whisper the truths Leonardo sought to veil. Geometry in Leonardo da Vinci's world was not simply a matter of numbers or lines drawn with a compass. It was the language of the universe itself. To measure a circle, to divide a square, to study the proportions of Thebody, was for him to step into the mind of God. Florence, the city of his youth, was already alive with whispers of geometry's sacred power. Cathedrals soared on foundations of perfect ratios. Pavements bore spirals that echoed the heavens. The frescoes of masters before him glimmered with compositions balanced by invisible mathematics. But Leonardo carried this fascination further than most dared. He believed that geometry was more than ornament. It was revelation. It was a bridge between man and the divine, or perhaps more dangerously, a way to bypass the church and touch the divine directly. Nothing embodies this better than his most famous drawing, the Vitruvian Man. A simple sheet of paper, a figure of a man standing with arms outstretched, limbs both extended and retracted, surrounded by a square and a circle. At first glance, it seems almost childlike, adiagram of proportion. Yet the longer one looks, the stranger, the more powerful it becomes. The man is both human and cosmic, flesh and geometry at once. His navel lies at the circle's center, suggesting that the body itself is inscribed with the laws of the universe. The square grounds him in earth, the circle crowns him in heaven, and he stands between the two, a mediator of realms. Leonardo had taken the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius and transformed them into an image that whispered of eternity. For Leonardo, the human body was not just a subject of study. It was a cathedral made of flesh. Each limb, each joint, each muscle obeyed mathematical laws. He dissected corpses not only to learn anatomy, but to discover ratios. The span of the arms equals the height of the body. The distance from hairline to chin equals 1/10 of total height. The foot is 1/7, the hand 1/10. Every curve, every angle seemed to echo an underlying order. To draw the Vitruvian Man was to proclaim that man himself was built upon divine mathematics. But the drawing is more than science. It is almost defiance. In a time when the church proclaimed that truth was revealed through scripture, Leonardo suggested another scripture: the body, the world, nature itself. Geometry, not theology, revealed God's hand. A circle drawn perfectly was an act of prayer. A proportion discovered in the veins of Thiam was a hymn. For Leonardo, the geometry of man was the geometry of God. Look deeper into his paintings, and this obsession becomes more unsettling. The Mona Lisa, at first glance, appears only as a portrait, a woman half smiling against a dreamlike landscape. But trace her face with compass and ruler, and symmetries emerge. Ratios of thirds and fifths govern her placement within the frame. The curve of her lips aligns with triangles that echo the golden ratio, a number that had haunted mathematicians for centuries as the fingerprint of beauty itself. To Leonardo, these were not accidents. They were proof that harmony, divine harmony, was embedded in reality, waiting to be uncovered. The golden ratio, also called the divine proportion, fascinated Renaissance thinkers. It appears in the spiral of seashells, in the branching of trees, in the architecture of Gothic cathedrals. Leonardo studied it obsessively, creating illustrations for Luca Pacioli's treatise De Divina Proportione. In those drawings, polyhedra unfold like jewels, every edge measured with precision. To study them was to feel as though one were peering through the fabric of creation itself. The ratio was not just mathematics, it was theology drawn with ink. Yet there was danger in this fascination. Geometry might bring one closer to God, but it also risked bringing one away from the authority of the church. For if divine order could be found in numbers, in spirals, in human flesh, what need was there for dogma? What need for priests as intermediaries, when one could measure a circle and touch eternity directly? Leonardo's notebooks never declare open rebellion. He was too careful, too secretive for that. But his art whispers it. In every balanced composition, in every hidden symmetry, one feels a question rising. Is God found in the church or in the ratio of a line? Consider the Last Supper, painted in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. At first glance, it is a depiction of Christ and his disciples at the moment Jesus declares that one of them will betray him. But beneath the drama, geometry rules. Christ sits at the center, forming a perfect triangle, stable and unshakable. The disciples are arranged in groups of 3, echoing the Trinity. The entire table, the walls, the ceiling beams, all converge toward Christ's head, the vanishing point of divine perspective. The painting is a sermon in geometry, as though Leonardo wished to say. Divinity is not proclaimed by words, but revealed in balance, in symmetry, in hidden mathematics. And yet there are silences here too, unsettling gaps. Where the Church expected clear symbolism, Leonardo left puzzles. The chalice of the Eucharist is absent. Christ's hands form strange angles, one reaching to bread, the other open, almost rejecting. The disciple beside him, often identified as John, appears feminized, leading some to suspect secret messages of Magdalene. Whether these theories hold truth or not, one thing is certain. Leonardo knew how to weave geometry and mystery together until the line between devotion and defiance blurred. Geometry is both clarity and concealment. To those who know its rules, it reveals hidden order. To those who do not, it conceals truth in plain sight. Leonardo may have used it in both ways, sometimes to illuminate, sometimes to hide. His works are maps, but not all who look will find the same path. Perhaps that was his intention, to craft images that satisfied the eyes of the Church while whispering deeper truths to those who knew how to look. The calm narration of his geometry, when read today, still carries unease. We see the perfect circle and the precise square, and we wonder, is this the language of devotion, or the mathematics of rebellion? Was Leonardo trying to glorify God, or to replace dogma with numbers? His silence leaves the question unanswered. He wrote in mirror script, he drew with ratios, but he never declared his creed. Instead, he left us patterns, equations disguised. As portraits, cathedrals disguised as bodies. Imagine standing before the Vitruvian Man, not as a drawing, but as a doorway. The man inscribed in circle and square is more than a study. He is a symbol of humanity, suspended between earth and heaven, between flesh and spirit, between freedom and faith. The geometry suggests not only that man reflects divine order, but that man himself might be divine, capable of reaching into the heavens with nothing more than his form. That suggestion alone was radical, for if every body holds God's ratios, then every person is sacred, not because the Church declares it, but because mathematics inscribes it. In Leonardo's time, such thoughts were not safe, and so, as with his mirror writing, he clothed them in geometry. His drawings became equations written in flesh. His paintings became sermons whispered in silence. To us, centuries later, they still speak, but only if we listen carefully. The mystery of his geometry is not only that it exists, but that it endures. We see it in the way his paintings calm the eye, in the way his drawings balance chaos and order. We feel it even when we cannot measure it. Leonardo's gift was not only to discover the hidden ratios, but to make us sense them. We stand before his works and feel harmony, though we cannot always say why. It is as though he reached into the all-secret mathematics of the world and pulled out a thread, weaving it into canvas and paper, so subtly that we are caught in its web without knowing. And so the question deepens. If Leonardo hid messages in geometry, what else did he hide? If the Vitruvian Man is more than a diagram, if the Last Supper is more than a meal, then perhaps his art is not art alone. Perhaps it is code, not a code, of words but of proportions, of triangles and circles, of alignments invisible to the casual eye, a code waiting still, 5 centuries later, to be deciphered. From this point, the documentary's path must lead further, into that banquet of symbols and silences, into the Last Supper itself, where every gesture and every line may conceal a message. If geometry was his language, then the dining hall of Milan may be his most complex sentence, a riddle set in paint and plaster. The mystery beckons us onward. The refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan is quiet now. Dust drifts through the air, tourists shuffle softly, and flashes of cameras echo faintly against walls that once carried the sounds of monks at prayer. Yet, when one stands before Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, the silence becomes something else, an echo, a weight, a presence that seems older than the hall itself. Painted in the 1490s, this mural has become one of history's most studied, photographed, debated, and deconstructed works of art. And yet, Despite the centuries of scrutiny, despite the countless volumes written, despite technology that can scan, beneath layers of paint, mysteries remain. The mural does not speak in words, but it whispers in silence. A silence that feels less like absence and more like a message deliberately withheld. At first glance, the scene is familiar. Christ at the center of a long table, his 12 disciples flanking him in a flurry of motion. It depicts the moment Jesus announces that one among them will betray him. Shock ripples through the group. Hands lift, faces twist, gestures freeze mid-reaction. But if one looks more carefully, questions surface. Questions that scholars and theorists have wrestled with for centuries. Why is there no chalice? Why does Christ, at the very moment of instituting the Eucharist, hold no cup of wine, no symbol of the sacrament that became the foundation of Christian ritual? The table is laden with food, bread and fish, but the central chalice, the heart of the ritual, is missing. To some, this absence is an oversight. To others, it is the loudest silence Leonardo ever painted. What if the absence was deliberate? What if Leonardo meant to suggest that divinity was not contained in an object, not in a vessel of stone or gold, but in the human figure of Christ himself? In this interpretation, Christ is the chalice, his body and blood, the true vessel of salvation. Yet to others, the omission feels more provocative. Was Leonardo quietly challenging the ritual authority of the Church? Was he suggesting that sacred symbols might not be necessary at all? This single absence, this chalice-shaped silence, has fueled centuries of speculation, a reminder that sometimes what is not painted speaks more loudly than what is. Beyond the missing chalice, the painting brims with gestures that appear more like signals than reactions. Every disciple seems frozen in a posture of meaning, as though captured in a code rather than conversation. Thomas raises a single finger, upward, an echo perhaps of doubt, but also a gesture often associated with secret knowledge. Peter leans forward aggressively, a knife hidden in his grasp, the blade pointing toward another disciple. Judas, the betrayer, clutches a small bag, of silver while shrinking back into shadow. John, or perhaps Mary Magdalene, as some have speculated, leans toward Christ with a face both serene and sorrowful, forming a sharp V of empty space between the figure and Christ himself. To some eyes, this V resembles a chalice, the very cup missing from the table now hidden in negative space. Coincidence or design? Even Christ himself at the very center forms a triangle with his body, a symbol of stability, of the Trinity. His hands stretch outward, one reaching toward bread, the other open, palm down, as though blessing or rejecting at once. The geometry of the scene is perfect. Lines of perspective converge to his head, making him the vanishing point of the entire painting. Yet this perfection feels too deliberate, as though Leonardo wished not only to tell a story, but to encode a message. It is here that more radical theories emerge. In 2007, researchers suggested that the arrangement of hands, loaves and positions on the table might form a musical score. If the figures are read from left to right as notes across a staff, the scene translates into a melody. When played, the tune is haunting, meditative, almost prayer-like. Could Leonardo have hidden music within the silence of paint? The idea seems wild but not impossible. He was, after all, a musician as well as an artist, a man who built instruments and composed melodies. For him, disciplines always overlapped. Art bled into science, geometry into anatomy, painting into music. Why not let a supper become a song? Others whisper of Gnostic shadows. In Gnostic texts, hidden from mainstream Christianity, Christ often speaks of secret teachings of wisdom reserved for the few. Some theorists suggest that Leonardo, influenced by whispers of these suppressed traditions, painted his own sermon of hidden knowledge. The feminine figure beside Christ, argued to be Magdalene, would embody a lost sacred balance between masculine and feminine, a duality erased by centuries of dogma. The missing chalice might then signify not absence but presence, the presence of Magdalene herself as the living vessel of sacred blood. Though mainstream historians dismiss such claims as speculation, the persistence of these theories speaks to the painting's uncanny power. It refuses to settle into silence. It continues to provoke, to raise questions that no authority has fully answered. Perhaps the most haunting silence of all lies not in what is painted, but in how it feels. Stand before the mural and you notice the stillness. Though the disciples flail in motion, the scene is frozen, locked in an eternal pause. Unlike other depictions of the Last Supper, where drama surges forward, Leonardo's figures seem suspended in an in-breath, as if about to speak, but forever held silent. It is this pause, this unnatural stillness, that gives the work its hypnotic power. The painting is not telling a story, it is holding a secret, and that secret may not be one alone. Some see patterns in the folds of tablecloths, in the placement of plates. Some trace Masonic symbols in the lines of the architecture, claiming Leonardo encoded knowledge of secret brotherhoods. Others find constellations mirrored in the disciples' heads, as though the scene were also a star map. Still others argue that the true silence of the mural lies in its deterioration, paint flaking away, details lost forever, messages that may have been erased by time itself. In this view, the silence is cosmic irony. Perhaps Leonardo did hide something, but time itself consumed the key. Yet there is a gentler possibility. Perhaps Leonardo wanted silence itself to be the message. In a world of sermons, dogmas, and proclamations, he created a work where the loudest voice is absence. No chalice, no overt symbols, no declaration of orthodoxy, just questions, gestures, spaces, and the lingering sense that truth is being withheld. Silence, after all, is not emptiness. It is potential. It is the pause before revelation. Leonardo's silence forces us to look, to search, to wonder, and in wondering, we become part of the mystery. The centuries since its creation have only deepened that mystery. The mural has survived bombs, restorations, decay, and controversy. It has been claimed by conspiracy theorists, adored by artists, dissected by scholars, and yet it remains untamed. It resists final explanation. It stands as a riddle, a mirror for whatever questions we bring, and maybe that was Leonardo's greatest code, not a secret to be solved, but an endless silence that keeps us asking. As the camera of our imagination pulls slowly back from the refectory, we linger on Christ's enigmatic figure. His mouth is closed, his eyes are cast down, serene, resigned, yet withholding. Around him, disciples cry, gesture, protest, but he is still. He is silence itself. The chalice is gone, the gestures are estranged, the painting is cracked with age, but his face endures. And here, the question turns, as softly as night turns to dawn. If Leonardo encoded silence into the Last Supper, what did he encode into the smile? For in another room on another canvas, another silence waits, not the silence of missing symbols, but the silence of Asmile that has puzzled the world for centuries. If the Last Supper is the geometry of silence, then the Mona Lisa is the silence of mystery incarnate. And so we follow the thread from Milan's dining hall to Florence's portrait studio, from Christ's silence to her smile. There she is, behind her thick glass chamber in the Louvre, gazing outward with a calmness that defies time. Millions of eyes have met her gaze, millions of voices have speculated on her smile, and yet none have claimed to possess her secret. Leonardo. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa is not merely a painting, it is a presence. To stand before her is to feel less like a viewer and more like the one being observed. And in that quiet observation lies a silence more powerful than words. Her smile is calm, but it is not peace. It is haunting, as though she knows something, something she will never tell. It is the silence of a mystery embodied in oil and pigment. The portrait itself is small, surprisingly so, compared to the towering expectations built around it. Just over 30 inches high, she sits against a painted landscape that stretches into mist. A river bends behind her, roads weave into the horizon, mountains rise like dreams dissolving into haze. Yet the true landscape is her face, its shadows, its curves, its enigmatic expression. Leonardo used a technique known as sfumato, blurring edges, so that light and shadow merge without boundary. The result is a face that seems to shift as you look, smiling in one glance, withdrawing in another, alive in a way that unsettles. The longer you stare, the more she changes, as if she is breathing insolence. But why does this smile feel so strange, so unforgettable? Some say it is because it sits between emotions, never committing. It is neither joy nor sadness, neither serenity nor mockery. It hovers in the space between categories, refusing to be defined. In psychological studies, when people are shown only her mouth, they report happiness. When shown only her eyes, they sense sorrow. Combined, the face confuses the brain, leaving us suspended in ambiguity. And ambiguity, Leonardo knew, is the seed of fascination. The smile never resolves. It lingers like an unfinished sentence. Of course, fascination breeds theories, and with Mona Lisa, theories multiply endlessly. Some claim that hidden in her background are maps, an encoded geography of Tuscany, secret directions perhaps to a place of personal or mystical significance. Others insist that microscopic letters are inscribed within her pupils, initials of secret lovers, codes, or even the artist's own monogram disguised as detail. Infrared scans have revealed underdrawings, adjustments, layers beneath her surface, like whispers beneath a voice. One theory even suggests she is not a single person at all, but a double identity. Part Lisa Gherardini, a Florentine woman long believed to be the subject, and part Leonardo himself, a self-portrait in feminine disguise. In this reading, the smile is not hers, but his own secret reflection peering back across centuries. The dreamlike aura deepens when we consider how she watches us. Walk across the room, and her gaze follows. Tilt your head, and her expression shifts. This is no trick of superstition, but a masterful calculation. Leonardo painted her eyes so that their focal direction lies slightly to the side, catching us wherever we move. The subtle asymmetry of her mouth amplifies the illusion. In life, no one could hold such an expression so perfectly, so endlessly. Yet here she is, holding it forever. To look at her is to step into a spell of painted silence. That silence feels almost alive, as though the painting itself possesses will. Some visitors report feeling unsettled, watched, even judged. The painting is not loud, it does not shout its genius. Instead, it whispers in stillness, pulling us inward until we question not the painting, but ourselves. What do we see when we meet her smile? Our own desire, our own fear, our longing for answers. Perhaps that is the true secret, that the smile reflects not one hidden code, but the infinite codes of the human mind. And yet, silence also invites darker whispers. Conspiracy theorists argue that the painting conceals symbols of secret societies, that the winding roads in the background mirror Masonic emblems, that the folds of her dress echo alchemical diagrams. Some believe she is pregnant, her hands gently resting as if concealing a secret lineage. Others go further, suggesting she was never a woman at all, but an ideal, a composite, a coded symbol of divine androgyny. Each theory projects meaning onto the silence, but none dispels it. The painting absorbs them all, as if designed to be a mirror of speculation. Leonardo himself was no stranger to silence. His notebooks are filled with sketches, machines, bodies, storms, grotesque faces, drawn with precision, but often without explanation. He wrote in mirror script, as though hiding his thoughts from casual readers. Silence for him was both protection and revelation. What he did not say often spoke more than what he did. In the Mona Lisa, silence becomes flesh, an eternal pause, a smile withheld, an enigma that resists all intrusion. Consider the contrast. In the Last Supper, silence came from absence, an empty chalice, a frozen gesture. In the Mona Lisa, silence comes from presence, her eyes, her smile, her living stillness. The two works speak to each other across time. One, a mural of many figures locked in eternal noise that never sounds. The other, a single figure whose silence is deafening. Both hold us hostage in mystery, and both invite us deeper into the labyrinth of Leonardo's mind. What makes her silence uncanny is the intimacy. Unlike grand religious scenes, this portrait leans close, personal, almost too personal. She sits, As though before us in conversation, her face lit softly, her body turned slightly, her gaze steady. It feels less like observing art and more like meeting someone. And in that meeting, she says nothing. Imagine sitting across Atable from someone who only smiled faintly, endlessly, never speaking. The silence would gnaw at you, pulling secrets from your own mind. That is the spell Leonardo cast, a silence so human it becomes inhuman. Over the centuries, countless writers and thinkers have fallen into this silence. Freud believed the smile reminded Leonardo of his mother. Others saw in it the embodiment of the ideal feminine, an archetype of grace. Still others treated it as a cipher of science, a demonstration of anatomy and optics disguised as art. Every interpretation circles the same mystery like moths around a flame, never touching its core. The painting thrives not on being solved, but on being unsolvable. And perhaps that was Leonardo's intention. He was fascinated with paradox, with the union of opposites, light and shadow, man and machine, flesh and spirit. In the Mona Lisa, he painted not a face but a paradox incarnate. She is smiling yet not. She is alive yet still. She is silent yet louder than any word. The portrait is less a depiction than a meditation, an equation without resolution. The excellence of her smile has endured wars, thefts, vandalism, and fame. In 1911, when she was stolen from the Louvre, the absence made headlines around the world. People wept at the empty wall. It was as though a presence had been ripped from humanity itself. When she was recovered, the relief was palpable, as though Thessalon's had been restored. Even in her absence, her silence spoke louder than any other painting's presence. Yet this silence leads us somewhere darker. For if the Mona Lisa is a portrait of mystery, Leonardo's sketches reveal another side of his silence, the grotesque, the strange, the unsettling. In his notebooks lie drawings of twisted faces, monstrous forms, dissected corpses. These are not the serene silences of a smile, but the harsh silences of death and decay. They are the other half of Leonardo's obsession, to uncover, to probe, to reveal what lies beneath beauty. If the Mona Lisa is the silence of secrets withheld, the sketches are the silence of secrets exposed. And so the flow of this story turns. From her haunting smile we are pulled downward into shadows cast by his darker visions. Her silence, dreamlike and elusive, becomes the doorway to another silence altogether, the silence of mortality, of strangeness, of the human face not idealized but distorted. It is as if the smile itself hides a tunnel into the grotesque, into the labyrinth where beauty and horror intertwine. The Mona Lisa does not speak, but she points. She points us toward the deeper silence in Leonardo's mind, the silence not of harmony but of unease. As our gaze lingers on her haunting calm, we begin to feel the edges fray, the dream shifting into something stranger. Her silence prepares us, softens us, for the darker pages of the notebooks, where smiles become grimaces, where serenity becomes distortion, where silence itself turns uncanny. And with this shift, we leave the chamber of the Louvre, step away from her eternal gaze and open the drawers of Leonardo's sketches. The smile fades, but the silence deepens. What secrets wait in the grotesque lines of his darker imagination? The answer lies in the next shadow, the next silence. Open the pages of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, and it feels less like entering a book, and more like stepping into another mind, one that never stopped moving, never stopped searching, never stopped dreaming. These notebooks are not orderly volumes, not neat treatises meant for readers. They are chaos and brilliance intertwined, filled with machines that could crush armies, dissections that peel away human flesh, and idea centuries ahead of their time. Yet scattered among the diagrams and doodles are shadows, sketches that feel deliberately strange, deliberately obscure, as if they were meant not to explain but to conceal. Leonardo's notebooks whisper with the sense that knowledge is both a gift and a danger, and that some secrets were never meant to be shouted. Turn a page, and you might find the design of a machine of war, chariots armored like beasts, cannons arranged in rings, bridges that fold and unfold like mechanical serpents. Leonardo, often remembered as the painter of serenity, was also an engineer of destruction. But the drawings are slippery. They're precise yet impractical, dazzling yet sometimes flawed, almost as if he wanted to show possibility without giving the full recipe. Was this carelessness or caution? Did he deliberately obscure his war engines so that Noon could build them without him? Or was he sketching more for his own imagination than for posterity? The ambiguity deepens the sense of shadow, as though the pages hold both revelation and disguise. Then comes the turn from machines to anatomy. Here the shadows grow darker still. Leonardo dissected bodies, human and animal alike, with a ruthless curiosity that frightened even his contemporaries. He opened chests to study hearts, peeled back, eyelids to trace the architecture of vision, carved into the womb to sketch the unborn child in its secret chamber. These drawings are magnificent in detail, almost photographic in their precision, but they are also haunting. They seem too advanced, too exact, as though drawn with knowledge that belonged to a later age. Some scholars argue that he anticipated discoveries not confirmed until centuries afterward. Did he stumble upon truths by sheer genius? Or was he glimpsing something that others could not yet see, knowledge that seemed impossible for his time? And yet not every drawing reveals. Some conceal. Among the clear diagrams are sketches that blur into grotesque faces, caricatures of distorted noses, swollen foreheads, twisted expressions. Why did he draw these? Were they studies of human variety? Or masks of something more symbolic? The grotesque heads stare at us with a mocking silence, like shadows of the Mona Lisa's smile. They seem less like documentation and more like dreams or nightmares, etched in ink. A page might hold a careful study of the human spine, and beside it a monstrous figure, half comic, half terrifying. The juxtaposition unsettles, as though Leonardo himself was navigating between revelation and chaos, science and shadow. It is this duality that makes the notebooks feel so uncanny. For every invention that could build, there is one that could destroy. For every drawing of beauty, there is one of deformity. The notebooks do not move in a straight line of progress, but swirl, like a storm, ideas colliding, overlapping, contradicting. They reflect not a man calmly recording discoveries, but a mind caught between illumination and obscurity, between showing and hiding. His mirror writing adds another layer of secrecy. Most of the notebooks are written backward, readable only in a mirror. Some say he did this to prevent theft, others that it was simply natural for his left hand, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was another veil, an instinct to conceal as much as to reveal, to wrap knowledge in shadow so that only those who sought it with effort could approach. And then there are the whispers of what is missing, of the thousands, of pages Leonardo wrote and drew. Barely a quarter survive today. The rest have vanished, scattered, burned, stolen, or hidden. What knowledge was lost with them? Stories persist of secret manuscripts, notebooks that contain dangerous ideas, perhaps suppressed by those who feared their implications. Imagine the lost pages. Did they hold designs for machines that could devastate cities? Or medical insights that could have changed the course of healing centuries earlier? Or something stranger still, visions not of his time at all, glimpses of knowledge that belong to futures far ahead. The very absence of these books feels like another sketch, a negative image drawn in silence. Consider too how some surviving pages seem deliberately unfinished. A machine drawn in dazzling detail but missing one crucial piece, an anatomical diagram that stops short of the final conclusion, a page of notes that trails into illegible scrawl. Was this simply the restless nature of a mind that never finished what it began, or was it a deliberate act of concealment, to reveal just enough to tantalize but not enough to complete? It is as if Leonardo wanted to leave shadows behind, fragments that would haunt us, never allowing full clarity. When we read these notebooks today, we drift between awe and unease. Awe at the sheer brilliance, the way one man could think across disciplines, painter, engineer, anatomist, dreamer. Unease at the sense that he touched on knowledge beyond his century, knowledge that feels uncanny even now. The pages glow with vision, but darken with secrecy. They are lanterns that illuminate and shadows that obscure. And always the question lingers, Did Leonardo know more than he chose to say? The whispers of missing books intensify this question. In the centuries after his death, his notebooks were scattered across Europe, sold to collectors, tucked into libraries, lost to wars. Some resurfaced, others vanished entirely. Rumors tell of manuscripts locked away in private collections, guarded by families who feared their power. Others speak of church archives where Leonardo's more unsettling ideas, his dissections, his challenges to doctrine, were quietly buried. Each rumor adds weight to the shadows, the idea that the true extent of his knowledge is not only unknown, but deliberately hidden. The war machines especially cast long shadows. Leonardo offered his services to rulers as a military engineer, but many of his designs would have been catastrophic had they been built. Giant crossbows capable of hurling boulders, cannons that rotated like the spokes of a wheel, armored vehicles that rolled forward crushing enemies beneath. Yet many of these designs were flawed, perhaps intentionally. Some historians believe Leonardo sabotaged his own inventions, ensuring they could not be replicated without him. In this view, the sketches were a kind of mask, a way to display genius while preventing catastrophe. He revealed the shadow of a machine, but concealed its true shape. The notebooks then become not just a record of imagination, but a shield, a way of controlling who could access dangerous power. Even his anatomical studies may hold shadows. The detail is astounding, but the purposes remain unclear. Was Leonardo seeking pure knowledge, or was he searching for secrets of life itself, secrets he felt should not be spoken openly? He described the heart as a furnace, the veins as rivers, the body as a machine more intricate than any invention. In some drawings, he blended anatomy with geometry, as though the human form were not only flesh, but also code, a secret language written by nature. If so, then his dissections were not just scientific, but mystical, veils pulled back from creation itself. And perhaps he feared the implications of what he found, fearing what others might do if they saw too clearly. Thus, he wrapped his findings in sketches that dazzled but also disoriented, truth hidden in plain sight. We might ask, did Leonardo himself believe some knowledge was dangerous? In his writings, he occasionally hints at secrecy, at withholding. He warns of revealing too much of nature's workings, of opening doors that mankind is not ready to walk through. He seemed to sense that knowledge is not neutral, that it carries consequences, sometimes beyond control. His notebooks, then, become fair battleground between curiosity and caution, between revelation and restraint. And this tension remains alive for us, centuries later. Reading his notebooks, we do not feel the certainty of textbooks, but the trembling of unfinished secrets. The sketches are alive not because they are complete, but because they are incomplete, shadows that suggest more than they show. They invite us into mystery, into a silence filled with questions. What did Leonardo see when he drew? What did he choose not to show? What truths died with the missing pages and what fragments remain, disguised as grotesque doodles or flawed machines? The silence of his notebooks is as haunting as the silence of the Mona Lisa. One gazes at us with a smile, the other whispers in ink and shadow. The final unease lies in this. Perhaps Leonardo's concealments worked too well. Perhaps the missing books are not merely lost but deliberately hidden, because what they contain is still too dangerous, too strange, too disquieting. We will never know. And that unknowing is itself the shadow that lingers, stretching across centuries, pulling us back to the notebooks again and again. To turn the pages of Leonardo's sketches is to walk a corridor of shadows. Light glimmers, here and there in the brilliance of invention, in the accuracy of anatomy. But always at the edges darkness waits, obscuring, withholding. It is a labyrinth with no end, a silence that cannot be broken, a mirror of the man himself. Leonardo gave just genius, but he also gave us shadows, and perhaps it is those shadows that haunt us most of all. Among the thousands of pages Leonardo da Vinci left behind, a few treasures survive in the light of day. The Codex Leicester, with its breathtaking studies of water, light, and celestial motion, rests now in the hands of collectors and museums. The Codex Atlanticus, a vast gathering of drawings and ideas, stretches across time like a map of his restless imagination. These are the jewels we can still hold, the manuscripts scholars pore over with magnifying glasses and reverence. But whisper close and you will hear of others, the books that did not survive, the manuscripts that seem to have vanished into silence. They are called the forbidden manuscripts, and their absence has become almost more haunting than the surviving works themselves. When we think of lost manuscripts, we often imagine accidents of history, fire, neglect, the careless passage of centuries. But in Leonardo's case, the rumors speak not only of loss but of deliberate disappearance. Some say entire volumes were hidden, locked away, or destroyed, not because they were unimportant, but because they were too important, too dangerous, too heretical, too strange for the world of the Renaissance to accept. The question then unfolds: what could Leonardo have written? What could he have drawn that would terrify the authorities of his age enough to ensure its silence? The Church looms large in this speculation. In Leonardo's time, the boundary between knowledge and heresy was razor-thin. To dissect a human body was already a dangerous act, often conducted in secret. To speak too boldly about the structure of the heavens could bring suspicion of heresy. Leonardo's surviving codices show us how far he pushed these boundaries. Machines that could flatten cities, studies of the heart as a mechanical pump, drawings of the moon as a rocky body rather than a perfect celestial sphere. Each of these ideas carried within it a seed of rebellion against accepted truths. If this is what survives, what of the manuscripts? That vanished? Were they buried by those who feared their implications? Did church officials quietly confiscate writings that challenged doctrine too directly? There are whispers, always whispers, of manuscripts that explored themes uncomfortably, close to the forbidden. Some claim Leonardo had sketched machines that could fly, not merely in theory but in practice. Wings designed with such precision they seemed capable of carrying men across the sky. To reveal such designs in his time would have bordered on blasphemy. To mimic the power of angels, to trespass into realms reserved for the divine. Others whisper of anatomical treatises so complete they revealed the secrets of reproduction, the mechanics of conception and growth in the womb, knowledge the Church tightly guarded beneath veils of morality and silence. And still others imagine even stranger things, texts that link geometry with mysticism, that hinted at ancient knowledge flowing through secret brotherhoods, knowledge Leonardo was entrusted to record, but also to guard. It is here in the haze between fact and legend that the forbidden manuscripts become more than missing books. They become symbols of secrecy itself. The story grows that Leonardo was not working alone, that he may have been connected to circles of hidden knowledge. The heirs of old mysteries passed quietly from hand to hand. Europe in his time was a place of secret societies and whispered brotherhoods, the remnants of the Templars, the shadows of hermetic orders, networks of scholars who exchanged forbidden texts in code. Was Leonardo one of them? His notebooks, with their mirror writing and cryptic sketches, certainly carry the aura of initiation, as though they were not written for the world, but for those who knew how to read. The Codex Atlanticus offers hints that deepen the mystery. Within its vast collection lie diagrams of war machines so devastating they read like prophecy of weapons centuries to come. Armored vehicles, multi-barreled cannons, machines of fire and smoke. Leonardo drew them with astonishing clarity, but whether he intended them as real weapons or allegories remains uncertain. Some historians suggest that in the missing manuscripts, these designs went further, refined, perfected, stripped of deliberate flaws. If such volumes existed, they would have been unspeakably dangerous. A single ruler with access to Leonardo's perfected war engines could have rewritten the map of Europe. Perhaps this was reason enough to hide them, to lock them away where no tyrant's hand could reach. The Codex Leicester, too, with its reflections on water and the cosmos, suggests paths that might have led into perilous territory. Leonardo dared to imagine the moon not as a perfect crystal orb, but as a world of stone and dust. He speculated on fossils and ancient seas, ideas that foreshadowed geology centuries before science confirmed them. To speak such things openly risked charges of heresy, for they contradicted the Church's account of creation. If there were manuscripts where Leonardo pressed even further, challenging the very chronology of the earth or the perfection of the heavens, those texts would have been incendiary in the 16th century. To suppress them would have been not only convenient but necessary from the perspective of religious authority. And yet the rumors do not speak only of suppression. Some suggest preservation, that somewhere in hidden vaults the forbidden manuscripts still exist. Perhaps they were spirited away not to be destroyed, but to be protected, guarded by those who recognized their danger and their value. In this version of the story, Leonardo becomes not merely an isolated genius, but a chosen keeper, part of a chain stretching back into antiquity. Their manuscripts then are not simply his inventions, but his inheritance, fragments of a knowledge too old and too powerful to be cast into the open world. He wrote them, not for everyone, but for those who would come after, for a brotherhood sworn to guard light in the midst of darkness. We might smile at such tales, dismiss them as legend, yet the silence of the missing books invites belief. If Leonardo wrote as much as we know he did, then far more should remain than we possess today. The scale of the loss is too great to dismiss as mere accident, and whenever absence grows too large, imagination fills the void. Into that silence rushes the idea of the forbidden, the hidden, the carefully protected. It is not only what Leonardo wrote that fascinates us, but what he chose not to reveal, or what others chose to bury on his behalf. Some scholars point to Leonardo's own words as hints. Scattered in his notes are warnings, "I will not write of this, for men are not ready to know it," or cryptic instructions suggesting that certain ideas should not be spread. He seems, at times, to speak to an unseen reader, a future mind, as though his writings were meant for someone not yet born. If so, then perhaps the forbidden manuscripts were never meant for his contemporaries at all, but for an audience centuries later, perhaps even for us. This speculation deepens the allure, the sense that somewhere, locked in a vault or hidden in a library, Accodex waits to be opened. Its knowledge still forbidden, still dangerous. What kind of knowledge could still frighten us? Machines of war we already possess. Anatomy we now understand. Astronomy has gone far beyond his speculations. And yet, the idea of a text blending science with mystery, geometry as a language of creation, anatomy as a map of spirit as well as flesh, still unsettles us. For such knowledge challenges not merely our understanding of the world, but our understanding of ourselves. It suggests that Leonardo was not only a scientist and an artist, but also a mystic, standing at the threshold between worlds, recording what he saw but veiling it in shadows. The legends tell of manuscripts hidden beneath the Vatican, guarded by archivists who will never let them see the light. Others tell of trunks carried across borders, fragments of Leonardo's papers disappearing into private collections, where they remain locked in vaults. A few tales are even stranger, of manuscripts carried east, traded, into Ottoman hands, or hidden in the libraries of secretive sects. None of these stories can be proved, yet all of them feed the same haunting possibility, that the true scope of Leonardo's vision remains concealed, waiting, forbidden. When we think of Leonardo, we picture the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the Vitruvian Man. We see the genius who gave the world beauty and proportion. But behind the public image lingers this other figure, Leonardo, the secret keeper, Leonardo, the guardian of manuscripts too dangerous to release. It is a dual image, light and shadow, revelation and concealment. And perhaps it is this duality that explains his enduring mystery. For we do not only admire what Leonardo gave us, we are haunted by what he withheld. The forbidden manuscripts, whether real or imagined, remind us of a deeper truth, that knowledge has always lived on the edge of fear. To know too much is to risk punishment, to risk unleashing forces one cannot control. Leonardo lived at that edge, writing in mirror script, sketching machines that could topple kingdoms, dissecting bodies in secret chambers. His surviving codices show us how close he came to danger. His missing onis suggest that sometimes he crossed it, and so we are left in uncertainty. Were these manuscripts truly destroyed, their secrets lost forever, Or do they still wait in silence in locked rooms and forgotten chests, protected by those who believe the world is still not ready? The question cannot be answered. It remains a shadow, a silence, a forbidden door we may never open. Yet perhaps that is fitting. For Leonardo's genius was never meant to be entirely grasped. He lived in mystery, he wrote in shadows, and he left us with questions more powerful than answers. The forbidden manuscripts are part of that legacy, not simply books that may or may not exist, but symbols of the eternal tension between curiosity and fear, knowledge and secrecy, revelation and concealment. To imagine them is to walk deeper into Leonardo's labyrinth, where every door opens onto another mystery, and where some doors perhaps wisely remain forever closed. Florence and Milan in the 15th and 16th centuries were not just cities of art, but also of secrets. Behind the gilded altarpieces, beneath the marble floors of cathedrals, in chambers lit only by oil lamps, whispered conversations took place about forbidden ideas, ideas too dangerous for pulpits or courts. Within this atmosphere of brilliance and suppression, one question lingers. Was Leonardo da Vinci, that restless genius of art and science, also a member of a secret brotherhood, a shadowed fellowship whose purpose was to guard knowledge stretching back to Egypt, Babylon, and Greece? Or were such whispers no more than the echo of imagination, the desire to see in Leonardo not just a man, but a messenger of mysteries? The story of hidden brotherhoods is as old as civilization itself. From the priests of ancient Egypt who veiled their geometry in temples, to the philosophers of Greece who hinted at truths only to their chosen students, there has always been talk of a chain of guardians. These were the keepers of sacred knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and above all the secret that the cosmos itself was structured in patterns, ratios, and correspondences. When such knowledge clashed with political or religious authority, it retreated underground, surviving in whispers, symbols, and coded writings. By the Renaissance, many believed that these secret traditions had not died, but had simply hidden themselves in plain sight. Leonardo, with his mirrored notebooks, his fascination with proportion, and his silence about personal beliefs, seemed to fit the mold perfectly. Consider how many of his contemporaries were connected to esoteric currents. Marsilio Ficino, translating Hermetic Texts for the Medici Pico della Mirandola, speaking of hidden correspondences between Christian, Jewish, and pagan thought. Botticelli, slipping mythological codes into paintings meant for private study. Florence, Leonardo's birthplace, was a crucible where philosophy, mysticism, and art mingled with power. For a curious and daring mind, it was impossible not to be touched by these currents. If there was a circle, a fellowship of minds intent on keeping the flame of ancient wisdom alive, Leonardo would have found it, or it would have found him. The speculation is not baseless. In his notebooks, Leonardo makes passing references that feel less like the musings of an artist and more like the veiled illusions of an initiate. He sketches symbols with no apparent practical purpose. He toys with wordplay, riddles, and cryptic diagrams. He surrounds his genius with silence, refusing to publish, refusing to confess. To the church, he was a man of infinite talent, yet strangely irreligious. To patrons, he was a master of spectacle, yet hard to control. To history, he remains a figure whose very obscurity suggests he knew more than he dared say. Was this silence a choice or an oath? The Brotherhood of the Shadow, as some modern writers call it, may not have had a name in Leonardo's time. Secret societies of the Renaissance were not the kind we imagine today, with formal lodges and oaths written in stone. They were looser, subtler, often existing as networks of thinkers, philosophers, and artists who shared fragments of forbidden thought. They gathered not in public halls, but in private libraries, noble courts, and garden terraces under starlight. Knowledge was passed not through proclamations, but through symbols hidden in art, metaphors whispered in poems, and diagrams disguised as decoration. If Leonardo moved in such circles, his art itself may have been his contribution to the great chain. Canvases and murals that contained more than beauty, codes meant for those with eyes to see. One cannot speak of Leonardo and brotherhoods without noting the parallels with the Pythagorean tradition. Pythagoras, centuries earlier, had bound his followers by secrecy, teaching them that numbers were the keys to the universe. Those teachings shaped Greek philosophy, then slipped underground only to resurface in Renaissance Italy. Leonardo's obsession with proportion, harmony, and geometry feels less like an artist's whim and more like an echo of Pythagoras's creed. Did Leonardo see himself as part of a lineage, a continuation of that hidden tradition? Did he know that, by drawing a man within a circle and square, the Vitruvian man, he was not just illustrating proportion, but inscribing a timeless code of the cosmos? But perhaps the strongest evidence for his possible initiation lies not in his notebooks or mathematics, but in his silences. Silence, after all, is the truest mark of an initiate. Consider how Leonardo carefully avoided making explicit claims about faith. He painted the divine, but spoke little of his own belief. He drew dissections of human corpses with chilling precision, but never published them, as if the knowledge was too dangerous. He designed machines of war, but rarely explained their intent. He recorded inventions that would not be built for centuries, as though leaving a breadcrumb trail for those who would come later. Such restraint suggests not only caution, but perhaps an agreement. To reveal just enough, but never all. The Brotherhood, if it existed, may not have seen itself as conspiratorial, but as preservational. To them, knowledge was fire. It could enlighten or burn depending on who held it. Leonardo, with his mercurial genius, may have been entrusted with pieces of this fire. The Church, to whom truth was a matter of control, could not be trusted with it. Patrons eager for power could not be trusted either. Only through concealment, in mirrored words, in coded drawings, in enigmatic paintings, could such knowledge survive without being corrupted. The question is not whether Leonardo belonged to a secret society in the modern sense, but whether his life itself was the embodiment of a silent oath. Protect the flame, pass it on in symbols, and never let it be destroyed. And yet, the idea of the Brotherhood of the Shadow also invites caution. Perhaps we are the ones weaving a story from fragments, linking coincidences into chains that never existed. Perhaps Leonardo was simply a man who liked puzzles, who wrote backward because it pleased him, who sketched strange machines because his imagination demanded it. Mystery thrives in the gaps of history, and Leonardo left us many such gaps. Still, even skepticism cannot erase the feeling that when we look at his works, the enigmatic faces, the geometric precision, the veiled symbolism, we are glimpsing something more than art. We are seeing a language that belongs to a tradition, older than Leonardo himself. As the narration slows, it invites the listener to imagine a night centuries ago, a small chamber lit only by a flickering candle. A group of thinkers sits in silence as one of them unrolls a parchment, diagrams of stars, circles, and human figures. They do not speak openly, for outside these walls, such ideas are heresy. Instead, they nod, they exchange knowing glances, and they return to their silence. Among them, perhaps, sits a man with long hair, eyes intense, sketching not just for himself but for a future he will never see. Was Leonardo truly there? We cannot know. But when we look at his art, his codes, and his silences, it feels as though he is still in that room, passing secrets forward in ways only symbols can carry. The section closes gently, not with certainty, but with suggestion. If Leonardo was indeed touched by a hidden brotherhood, then his lesser-known paintings, works overlooked, unfinished, or sidelined by history, may be the true vaults of this knowledge. Unlike the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper, which have been endlessly scrutinized, these quieter canvases may still hold codes waiting to be seen. With this thought, the narrative transitions into the next chapter, where we move from the idea of hidden brotherhoods into the eerie anomalies in Da Vinci's lesser-known works, paintings that seem ordinary until their shadows are followed. When most people think of Leonardo da Vinci, they picture the familiar, the enigmatic Mona Lisa, the monumental Last Supper, the elegant Vitruvian man. But Leonardo's story is far larger than these celebrated works. Scattered across his life are other portraits, sketches, and unfinished canvases that rarely make the spotlight, yet carry strange anomalies, quiet whispers, and veiled suggestions. These are not the polished jewels of Renaissance fame, but half-shadowed fragments, often dismissed by historians, left in drawers or debated endlessly. And yet, when we lean close, they feel like something more, like portraits of the invisible carrying secrets we were never meant to fully grasp. It begins with his unfinished portraits. Leonardo, famous for abandoning projects, left behind faces that are frozen between being and nothingness. The lady with an ermine stares at us, with a gaze too knowing for a simple courtly commission. Her animal, the ermine, symbolized purity, but also belonged to heraldic codes known only to insiders. Why did Leonardo emphasize it so strongly, painting its fur with such detail that it almost glows? Was it simply the pride of a skilled artist, or was he hiding meaning behind an animal that, in secret circles, represented transformation and hidden knowledge? To those who look longer, the portrait begins to feel less like a depiction of a woman with her pet, and more like an emblem disguised as a portrait. Then there is the portrait of a musician. Incomplete, muted, and overlooked, the sitter's face is rough, unfinished, his gaze vacant. What is finished, however, is the sheet of music he holds. The notes are faint, blurred, but scholars have argued for centuries whether they form a hidden code. Was it simply a fragment of melody, or was Leonardo embedding numbers into musical, formula ratios that mirrored the harmonies of the universe? In esoteric traditions, music was never mere entertainment. It was the mathematics of the cosmos, a way to glimpse divine order. Was Leonardo hinting at this deeper view, leaving us not just a face but a cipher in song? Landscapes, too, whisper with oddities. Leonardo's backgrounds are never idle. Behind saints, virgins, and enigmatic sitters, cliffs twist unnaturally. Rivers wind in patterns too deliberate. Skies shift in uncanny tones. In the Virgin of the Rocks, the figures seem enveloped by stone arches and caverns, an underground world of mystery rather than a biblical scene. Scholars have long argued, why place holy figures in such strange landscapes? Was Leonardo simply inspired by geology, fascinated by rocks and strata as he was in his scientific studies? Or was he embedding another layer, maps disguised as scenery, clues to hidden sites known only to initiates? Some researchers have even suggested that certain backgrounds align with real Italian geography, like ghostly echoes of secret locations. If true, then Leonardo's art was not just allegory but cartography. Portraits of invisible places masked as holy settings. Faces, too, conceal anomalies. Look closely at the unfinished St. Jerome in the wilderness. The saint, gaunt and solitary, kneels in contemplation. Yet behind him the landscape again feels coded. The rocks form shapes that verge on suggestive geometry. His lion, half-formed, crouches like a symbol. Even the saint's thin, almost emaciated face is said to resemble hidden sketches of other figures, as if Leonardo was layering identities into one visage. Was St. Jerome also Leonardo himself, the penitent, the wanderer, the thinker in exile? And if so, why bury this self-portrait in a holy guise? Then there are the sketches, hundreds of them, drifting between anatomy, machines, and human faces. Some are grotesque, distorted caricatures of old men and women with twisted features. Historians often dismiss them as Leonardo's amusements, a diversion of his restless pen. But others see more, codes of human archetypes, echoes of the Aida medieval Book of Faces, in which physiognomy, the reading of character from appearance, was treated as hidden science. Were these distorted sketches Leonardo's private catalogue of human types, a symbolic gallery of the hidden patterns behind flesh? Or were they masks, disguises to keep his true ideas secret behind grotesque humour? Even stranger are the subtle insignias that appear almost by accident in his art. In certain sketches, spirals recur, not random but precise, measured, echoing the golden ratio. In portraits, the eyes seem to hold faint letters, initials, numbers. Generations of analysts have claimed to find code hidden in the Mona Lisa's pupils, in the folds of garments, in the arrangement of hands and objects. Many such claims crumble under scrutiny, yet the persistence of the idea suggests something deeper. Perhaps Leonardo trained us himself, with his riddles and reversals, to always suspect a hidden layer. Perhaps he wanted us to wonder, to see that invisibility is itself a presence. It is not only his paintings and sketches that whisper with anomalies, but also his unfinished engineering drawings. At first glance, these are merely inventions: siege machines, flying devices, water pumps, bridges. But the closer we look, the stranger they become. Many of these machines would not work as drawn. Was Leonardo simply experimenting, or was he deliberately sketching them incorrectly, concealing their true function from prying eyes? Some machines seem to carry symbolic designs rather than practical ones. Spirals that evoke cosmic motion, wheels that resemble mandalas, war engines that, when mirrored or rotated, echo ancient symbols of balance and duality. It is as if Leonardo could not resist embedding philosophical riddles even in the cold mechanics of war. Take, for instance, his famous design for Agent Crossbow. To most it looks like a marvel of intimidation, a machine of war. Yet some researchers have noted its proportions mirror the ratios used in sacred architecture. Was it ever meant to fire at all? Or was it a meditation in disguise, a way to inscribe cosmic proportion into the shape of a weapon, a contradiction only Leonardo could conjure? What if the true purpose of such sketches was not their construction, but their concealment, diagrams of harmony hidden in drawings of destruction? As the narration deepens, the tone becomes dreamlike, suggesting that Leonardo's entire body of work, portraits, sketches, machines, may itself be a grand riddle. Each fragment is unfinished, not because Leonardo lacked discipline, but because completion was never the point. The point was to leave openings, gaps where future eyes might enter, questions that would outlive him. The unfinished face, the blurred landscape, the impossible machine, all are invitations, whispers half heard, codes half seen. To live with Leonardo's art is to live in the presence of invisibility, to sense that behind the visible lies a hidden order he never named aloud. And yet the question remains, what was the message? Was Leonardo recording knowledge too dangerous for his time? Astronomy that contradicted scripture, anatomy that defied the church, philosophies that placed man not as sinner, but as cosmic being? Or was his message more subtle still, that all knowledge is layered, that truth itself can only be approached obliquely, never directly? If so, then his art is not a vault of hidden content, but a training ground for hidden perception. By studying Leonardo, we learn to see differently, to expect symbols where others see surface, to hear whispers where others hear silence. The portraits of the invisible do not merely show us what Leonardo saw, but how he wanted us to see. A woman with an ermine becomes not just a sitter, but an emblem. A musician's sheet of notes becomes not just melody, but code. A rocky background becomes not just scenery, but a map of mystery. An unfinished face becomes not just abandoned work, but a challenge. Complete me with your imagination. Find what I left unwritten. In this way, Leonardo continues his work, centuries after his death, shaping not canvases but minds. As this section draws toward its close, the narration widens, returning to the question of invisibility itself. Perhaps Leonardo's greatest art was never what he made, but what he concealed. To look at his paintings, his sketches, his machines, is to stand before doors half open, never fully shut, never fully ajar. They beckon us to peer through, but always leave something unseen, something withheld. This is the paradox of Leonardo, the man who revealed more than any of his age, yet who also concealed more than we can ever measure. And so the camera of the imagination lingers on his lesser-known works, the unfinished portraits, the eerie sketches, the impossible machines, and lets them fade into shadow. They are not just fragments of art, but fragments of a code, messages, scattered like stars across the sky, each one faint but together forming constellations. From these whispers, the narration prepares to carry us further into Leonardo's machines of war and invention. For even there, in the clatter of gears and the turning of wheels, invisibility continues to speak. Leonardo da Vinci is often remembered as the painter of serene faces and dreamlike landscapes, but behind his delicate brushstrokes lived an imagination fascinated by engines of destruction. Hidden among his notebooks, scrawled between sketches, of saints, rivers, and human anatomy, we find designs for machines that seem born from nightmares and dreams alike. Monstrous crossbows, armored vehicles, cannons, siege engines, and contraptions so unusual they defy clear categorization. Yet, here as in all of Leonardo's work, nothing is quite as it seems. The engines of war that appear so fearsome on paper were, in many cases, impractical or deliberately flawed. Wheels too small to bear their weight, firing mechanisms that could never work, calculations that miss the mark. Was Leonardo, the man whose precision extended to the anatomy of eyelids and the currents of rivers, suddenly careless when it came to war? Or was there a deeper strategy, a silence within the roar of imagined battle, a code disguised as destruction? His notebooks brim with martial inventions, and at first sight they suggest a mind preparing for conflict. There is the enormous crossbow, spanning yards in length, its bow drawn taut by cranks and levers. There are plans for a multi-barreled cannon, an ancestor to modern machine guns, capable in theory of unleashing rapid volleys of fire. There is the armored vehicle, a turtle-like tank, bristling with cannons on all sides, its shell angled to deflect arrows and stones. There are siege ladders, battering devices, even bizarre contraptions for naval warfare, underwater breathing gear, floating bridges, vessels designed to sink enemy ships. And yet, as we study them, doubts creep in. Many would not have worked as drawn. Some are missing crucial parts. Others betray miscalculations too obvious for a mind like Leonardo's to overlook. This paradox has haunted scholars for centuries. Was Leonardo a careless dreamer, filling his notebooks with fanciful sketches never meant to be built? Or was he, instead, deliberately disguising his genius, leaving errors to mislead anyone who might try to steal or misuse his inventions? After all, he lived in a world of courts and patrons, where rulers sought artists not only for frescoes, but for machines of power. Leonardo offered his services in letters, advertising his skills in building bridges, fortifications, and weapons. Yet we must ask, was his heart ever truly in warfare, or was it simply a necessity, a mask he wore to secure patronage? Could it be that his war machines are less weapons than puzzles, drawn to satisfy his patrons' eyes, while embedding riddles for those who looked closer? The great crossbow offers one of the clearest examples. On the page it seems magnificent, agent capable of launching projectiles with devastating force. But engineers who have studied it note flaws. The frame would buckle, the energy stored in the bow too much for its supports. Was this oversight or intention? Some suggest Leonardo made it deliberately impossible, ensuring that if the design were stolen, it could not be built. Others whisper that the crossbow was never meant to be fired at all. Its proportions echo mathematical ratios used in sacred geometry. Could it have been a meditation in wood and string, a diagram of cosmic balance disguised as a weapon? Perhaps. The giant crossbow was less an engine of death and more a silent mandala, written in the language of war to conceal the harmony of the universe. The armored vehicle, too, tells a similar story. At first glance it looks modern, a prototype of the tank centuries ahead of its time. A dome of protective plating, cannons protruding from every angle, wheels to propel it forward. But the design contains a glaring flaw. The gearing system would make the wheels turn in opposite directions, leaving the machine stuck in place. This is not the kind of error Leonardo would casually make. He understood mechanics too well. The suspicion sees that he sabotaged his own design, ensuring it could never roll across a battlefield. Was this his quiet protest, a way of obeying the requests of his patrons while refusing, in truth, to unleash such destruction? In this way, the armored tank becomes less a machine of war and more a machine of silence, powerful but frozen, eternal in its stillness, a paradox of potential that can never be realized. Across his notebooks we see this same duality, designs that appear fearsome, but which dissolve into impossibility under scrutiny. Multi-barreled cannons that would jam, siege ladders too heavy to raise, naval devices that could not survive the currents they were meant to master. And yet Leonardo returned to them, sketching them in detail, shading them, considering them. Why? perhaps because his true obsession was not with war itself, but with motion, force, balance, thematics of energy. To design a war machine was, for him, an excuse to explore the geometry of circles, the tension of strings, the rotation of gears. In a sense, the battlefield was only a metaphor, a theater where he could play out the invisible laws of physics. The machines are engines of war in appearance, but engines of silence in essence. Silent, because they are frozen on the page. Silent, because they were never built. Silent, because their true purpose was contemplation, not carnage. And yet there is something more unsettling. Some scholars whisper that Leonardo embedded puzzles within his designs, ciphers woven into the curves of wheels and the arrangement of gears. His mirrored writing already made his notebooks difficult to read. But what if the sketches themselves were codes? A spiral may not only be a gear, but a symbol of eternity. A sequence of cannon barrels may not only be an attempt at rapid fire, but a hidden diagram of planetary orbits. A bridge may not only span a river, but signify the passage from one state of being to another. In this view, Leonardo's machines are double-layered texts, functional drawings for the uninitiated, symbolic diagrams for those who could read the invisible. Engines of war, yes, but also engines of philosophy, silence, and hidden knowledge. The paradox of Leonardo's war machines leads us inevitably to his obsession with flight. For here, more than anywhere else, the contradiction between destruction and transcendence becomes clear. On one page, we see weapons meant to shatter walls. On the next, wings sketched in delicate arcs, feathers studied in minute detail, contraptions designed to lift the human body into the sky. To design a tank was perhaps a duty, but to design wings was a dream. Leonardo watched birds with the patience of a monk, filling page after page with studies of their flight. He analyzed the curve of feathers, the beating of wings, the gliding of air. He attempted to recreate these mechanics in wood and cloth, building devices that would let man imitate the creatures of the sky. None worked as he hoped, but the longing behind them remains visible. Flight, for Leonardo, was more than invention. It was symbol. To rise into the air was to escape the weight of earth, the pull of war, the demands of courts and patrons. It was liberation, transcendence, the soul freed from the body. And in this way, the engines of war give way to engines of silence, and then to engines of dream. The tank that could never move, the crossbow that could never fire, the cannon that could never strike, all dissolve into wings that might someday lift. The silence of sabotage becomes the silence of the sky, a place where no cannon can roar, no army can march. Was Leonardo hiding this trajectory deliberately? Was his fascination with war a mask to conceal his true obsession with transcendence? Some suggest that by drawing weapons he knew could never work, he was shielding himself from suspicion, securing patronage, while pursuing his secret studies of flight, light, and harmony. If so, then his notebooks become a theater of misdirection. Destruction on one page, transcendence on the next, silence binding them together. The engines of war may have been camouflage, shadows cast to protect the invisible light of his greater visions. As the section draws to a close, the narration lingers on the paradox. Leonardo, the man of peace, employed by war, the genius who sketched death machines that could never kill, the dreamer who disguised meditations on harmony within diagrams of destruction. His notebooks invite us to ask not only what he invented, but what he concealed. Did he fear the misuse of his genius, or did he simply delight in leaving riddles? Did he intend us to see through the flaws, to notice the silence behind the noise? Or are we reading too much into what was only the restless play of a mind that could never stop drawing? The engines of war remain, frozen on paper, their gears silent, their cannons unfired. And yet, as we look at them, we sense they were never truly about war at all. They were about the hidden patterns of motion, the symbolism of force, the yearning for flight. They were puzzles disguised as machines, mandalas drawn in iron and wood, silence hidden in the heart of noise. They remind us that even in the darkest sketches of destruction, Leonardo's hand was guided by something gentler, curiosity, imagination, and the dream of rising beyond. And so, from the silence of tanks that never moved and crossbows that never fired, we turn toward the sky, following Leonardo's gaze upward, where his engines of war transform into wings. What began in destruction dissolves into transcendence, and what began in noise fades into silence. In this way, Leonardo's story leads us not deeper into battlefields, but higher into the dream of flight, a dream that, centuries later, would come true, as humans finally rose into the air, carrying with them the memory of the man who first dared to imagine it. When we turn the fragile pages of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, we find ourselves standing at the threshold between earth and sky. The drawings of wings, feathers, and flying machines seem to shimmer with something more than invention. They are not merely designs for contraptions of wood and cloth. They carry within them the weight of longing, as if Leonardo himself were a caged spirit pressing against the bars of gravity, seeking escape. His sketches of flight feel almost spiritual, filled with reverence for the mystery of birds and the dream of transcendence. In these pages, one senses not just the mind of an engineer, but the yearning of a soul that wanted to rise beyond the confines of flesh and soil. For Leonardo, to study birds was not only to understand mechanics, but to listen for hidden messages, carried on wings, as if nature itself whispered of realms forbidden to ordinary men. Birds were everywhere in his imagination. He observed them tirelessly, filling notebook after notebook with studies of their anatomy, the span of their wings, the rhythm of their beating flight, the curve of their feathers as they caught the wind. He drew them in stillness and in motion, captured their form in detail precise enough to rival his anatomical studies of the human body. Yet beneath this precision lies something more. His birds are not just diagrams, but symbols. To Leonardo, they were living metaphors for freedom, for transcendence, for the soul's ability to escape the heavy prison of earth. In the wings of swallows, in the arcs of kites, in the soaring glide of hawks, he saw more than creatures of air. He saw hints of a spiritual path, a language written in feather and sky. One of the most haunting entries in his notebooks is a childhood memory. Leonardo recalls in words both strange and vivid that when he was in his cradle, a kite descended upon him and opened its tail against his lips. Some scholars interpret this as a metaphor, others as a dream remembered, but Leonardo records it with solemnity, as if it shaped his destiny. The kite, a bird often associated with prophecy and spiritual vision, becomes a messenger. To some, this entry is evidence of Leonardo's sense of being chosen, marked by the natural world for a path of hidden knowledge. The bird becomes not only a memory but a symbol, a visitation, a secret initiation into mysteries of flight, vision, and transcendence. If true, then all his later sketches of wings are not just inventions, but echoes of this primal encounter, attempts to return to that first moment of contact, when the sky touched him through the beating of feathers. His designs for flying machines are many, and they unfold like variations on a dream. The most famous is the ornithopter, a device meant to mimic the flapping of wings. Leonardo sketched frames of wood where a man might lie suspended, arms and legs connected to mechanisms that would power great cloth wings. He believed that by imitating the motion of birds, man could rise into the air. Yet, like many of his war machines, the designs were impractical. Human muscles lacked the strength to generate such lift. The dream of the ornithopter was impossible, but that impossibility did not matter. What mattered was the vision itself, a man stretching wings against the sky, poised between failure and transcendence. Other designs reveal gliders, parachutes, even helicopters centuries before their time. Each device is part invention, part meditation. Leonardo was not merely drawing machines. He was contemplating the laws of nature, the invisible geometry of air. He studied vortices, the spiraling of wind, the way currents carried birds aloft. He understood that flight was not brute force, but harmony, the delicate balance of weight, lift and flow. His flying machines, then, were not failures but revelations. They showed the world that human imagination could dream beyond its boundaries, could look upward and see not only birds, but mirrors of itself, reflections of its own desire to ascend, But what if Leonardo's obsession with flight was not only about mechanics or even transcendence, but about forbidden realms? The Renaissance was a time when boundaries between science, magic, and spirituality blurred. To rise into the air was to approach the heavens, a realm traditionally reserved for angels and the divine. Human flight carried echoes of hubris, of Icarus falling from the sky, punished for daring to reach too high. Did Leonardo dream then of trespassing into spaces forbidden to mortals? Was his desire to fly also a desire to know what lay beyond the limits of the human condition, a curiosity so profound it bordered on the sacred and the dangerous? In this way, the hidden bird becomes not only symbol of freedom, but of temptation, a lure toward mysteries humans were perhaps not meant to touch. And yet Leonardo was no reckless dreamer. He approached flight with the same blend of reverence and analysis he gave to anatomy and painting. He dissected birds as carefully as he dissected cadavers, studying the ligaments that controlled wings, the muscles that lifted feathers. His notebooks are filled with comparative studies, the mechanics of birds mirrored against the mechanics of men. In this way, the dream of flight merged seamlessly with his gaze inward, into the body itself. He saw the human body as a machine, levers of bone, pulleys of tendon, reservoirs of breath. If a bird's body could be understood, perhaps the human body could be reshaped, extended, given wings not of flesh, but of invention. In turning from birds to human anatomy, Leonardo seemed to be asking a profound question. Is the body itself a cage or a vehicle? If the body is a machine, then it can be modified, adapted, expanded. The dream of flight is not simply about wings, but about transformation. To build wings for man is to imagine humanity as unfinished, as capable of evolution through art and science. Leonardo's studies of anatomy, the muscles of the chest, the structure of the shoulder, the expansion of the lungs, all become, in this light, part of his greater vision of transcendence. He was mapping the limits of the body in order to see where it could be extended, how it might surpass itself. There is, in these sketches, a sense of intimacy with mystery. Leonardo did not approach the body as something to conquer, but as something to listen to uncover. His dissections, while clinical, are drawn with the same tenderness as his birds. The veins of a heart, the curve of a bone, the tendons of a hand, they glow with beauty, as if each line drawn was a prayer. To place these studies beside his wings is to feel the dialogue he was having, the human body yearning for flight, the bird's body embodying it naturally. Between them lies a bridge, fragile but profound, invention as the means of crossing. The more we look, the more we sense that Leonardo's dream of flight was not an isolated curiosity, but a symbol woven into all his work. His paintings, too, echo it. The landscapes of the Mona Lisa dissolve into misty mountains that seem to float, weightless, as if seen from above. The angels in his religious works bear wings that shimmer with anatomical precision, more real than the idealized faces they accompany. In the Annunciation, the angel's wing is drawn with the same accuracy as his bird studies, as if Leonardo wanted to remind us that even divine messengers obey the same geometry as kites and swallows. Here, flight becomes a sacred act, the bridging of human and divine, the visible and invisible. But perhaps the most mysterious element of Leonardo's obsession with flight is its silence. None of his machines ever flew. His wings never beat against the air. His helicopters never spun into the sky. His parachutes never caught the wind. And yet the dream persists, luminous and haunting, more powerful for its failure. The silence of his flight is the silence of longing, of visions too vast for their time. In this silence, Leonardo's dream becomes universal. We too know the yearning to rise, to escape gravity, to transcend the body. His silent wings speak to our own hidden bird, the part of us that remembers, even if dimly, that we are not meant to remain earthbound forever. Some scholars have wondered if Leonardo coded his spiritual beliefs into these designs. He lived in a time when the church held power over thought, when speculation about transcendence and forbidden realms could be dangerous. perhaps his flying. Machines were veiled prayers, diagrams of spiritual ascent disguised as technical inventions. In this view, the ornithopter is less a machine and more a meditation, its cranks and levers symbolic of inner effort, its wings symbols of liberation. To study flight was to study the soul's upward path. To sketch wings was to draw a roadmap to transcendence. If this is true, then Leonardo's hidden bird is not only feathered, but spiritual, an emblem of humanity's eternal yearning for what lies beyond. And yet, in all his soaring visions, Leonardo never abandoned Earth. His eyes, always keen, returned again and again to the human body, the material vessel of life. In this duality, earth and sky, body and spirit, machine and bird, lies the paradox of his genius. He sought transcendence but through detail. He dreamed of the heavens but by dissecting the veins of the heart. He wanted to rise into forbidden realms but only by building bridges of observation and invention. His hidden bird, then, was not a rejection of the body but an extension of it, a reminder that transcendence begins within. As we close this section, we are left with an image. Leonardo, standing in a field at dusk, his eyes lifted to the sky as a flock of birds wheels overhead. In his hands a notebook, on its page lines forming the skeleton of a machine that will never fly. And yet, in his gaze, there is no disappointment. There is only wonder. For Leonardo knew that the act of dreaming was itself a kind of flight, that the imagination could lift us higher than wood and cloth ever could. His hidden bird was already within him, within us all. The quiet promise that one day humanity would rise, not as angels, not as birds, but as something new, something born of the marriage between body and dream. And so the sketches of wings remain, silent but radiant, carrying forward a vision larger than invention. They whisper of transcendence, of longing, of the eternal dialogue between earth and sky. They remind us that Leonardo's greatest invention was not a machine, but the possibility of dreaming beyond limits, of listening to the hidden bird that still beats, invisible, within the human heart. Florence, Milan, and beyond, wherever Leonardo da Vinci traveled, he carried with him not only brushes and notebooks, but also an insatiable hunger to look deeper than the world permitted. For many artists of his time, the surface was enough. A painted face, a sculpted form, a church commission, all could satisfy reputation and patronage. But for Leonardo, surfaces were masks, and masks begged to be removed. When he turned his gaze upon the human body, he was not content to capture its outer beauty. He wanted to peer beneath skin and sinew into the structures that made life possible. Yet this pursuit was not without danger, for the 15th and 16th centuries were steeped in prohibitions against dissection, fueled by both religious doctrine and societal unease. To open the human body was to trespass upon holy ground, to meddle with mysteries that many believed belonged only to God. And yet, quietly, under candlelight, Leonardo cut deeper. The early records suggest he began his anatomical studies with animals, dissecting oxen and birds to understand the mechanics of movement. But soon, he graduated to the human form. In hospitals and monasteries, he found access to cadavers, bodies unclaimed, bodies forgotten, bodies whose silence became his canvas. With pen and ink, he rendered muscles, veins, and organs with staggering precision. Each drawing bore the clarity of science, yet also the reverence of art. One can almost imagine him bent over the body of an old man, whispering not prayers of the church but questions. What is this vessel of flesh? Where does thought reside? Where does the soul hide? The notebooks record his awe as much as his knowledge. He drew the chambers of the heart as though they were cathedrals, sketching valves with the meticulous care one might give to stained glass windows. He traced the spiral coils of the inner ear, as if mapping the architecture of sound itself, the uterus, the fetus curled within, the branching vessels that fed it. He rendered all with a balance of science and tenderness that feels almost sacred. For Leonardo, the body was not merely a machine, it was a temple, and to study it was to approach divinity. But here lies the mystery. Was Leonardo simply driven by science centuries ahead of his time, or was there more? Some argue that his dissections reveal an obsession beyond medicine, that he sought not only to chart anatomy, but to locate the very spark of life, the immaterial essence that animates flesh. His drawings of the brain, his fascination with the ventricles suggest he believed the soul itself might dwell there, hidden in chambers as yet undiscovered. Others whisper that his forbidden dissections were not merely curiosity, but a secret mission to unlock truths suppressed by the Church, truths too dangerous to be spoken aloud. The tone of his notebooks supports this suspicion. Many of his anatomical drawings are accompanied by mirrored script, written backward, as though he feared prying eyes. Why cloak medical study in secrecy unless it bordered on heresy? And indeed, for the Church of his time, the soul was sacred, untouchable, its mysteries belonging only to Scripture. To suggest that its seat might be located, studied, even diagrammed, was a quiet rebellion. Leonardo walked a thin line, balancing his service to powerful patrons with his hunger for knowledge that might condemn him if revealed. The viewer of Vinci, this documentary is invited into the candlelit chamber to imagine the atmosphere of those clandestine nights, the smell of wax, the stillness of stone walls, the faint echo of dripping water, the silence of a lifeless body stretched across a table. Leonardo's quill scratching across parchment is the only sound. The act feels both sacrilegious and devotional. He was not desecrating, he was revering. His dissections were prayers in their own right, his sketches offerings to truth. Yet because his truth was dangerous, he hid it in notebooks, many of which would vanish after his death. Only centuries later would the world rediscover them, marveling at how he had mapped arteries, bones, and muscles with accuracy that rivaled modern textbooks. Still, something unsettles the historian who looks closely. Not every drawing is clinical. Some carry symbols, arrangements that seem less anatomical than allegorical. In one, veins radiate outward like branches of a cosmic tree. In another, the uterus resembles a sphere, echoing his fascination with celestial bodies. Could it be that Leonardo saw the human body as a microcosm of the universe, flesh reflecting the heavens? This idea was not foreign to Renaissance thought. The concept of the microcosm and macrocosm, that man mirrors the cosmos, permeated philosophy. But Leonardo's drawings suggest not only belief, but discovery. He seems to whisper, the secrets of the universe are folded into our very being. And so the narration drifts toward unease. What did Leonardo truly find in those dissections? Did he glimpse something the Church did not wish known, a soul that could be mapped, or a realization that the soul, as preached, was but metaphor for something more material, consciousness arising from the structures of the brain? If so, then Leonardo was not only centuries ahead, but also quietly dismantling the theological scaffolding of his world. No wonder his writings stayed hidden, his discoveries unpublished. To reveal them would have been to invite charges of heresy, even execution. The tension builds as we consider the fate of his manuscripts. Many were lost, scattered, or hoarded away in private collections. What truths may have been contained in those vanished pages? Was there evidence that he had indeed identified functions of organs long before modern science? Was there speculation on the nature of the soul itself, written in mirrored words now destroyed? The silence of history leaves us guessing, and in that silence, mystery thrives. Narration turns reflective, drawing parallels between body and art. Just as Leonardo painted layers of glaze upon canvas, concealing depths of expression in a single smile, so too he peeled layers from the human body, seeking expressions hidden beneath the surface. His art and his dissections were not separate endeavors. They were mirrors of one another. The softness of skin in the Mona Lisa reflects his knowledge of muscles beneath. The anatomical accuracy of his flying machines borrows from his studies of bird wings and human shoulders. His work was a tapestry, woven of flesh, form, symbol, and code. As the section continues, we imagine Leonardo's inner dialogue. Did he ever fear he had gone too far? Did he ever look upon a dissected body and feel haunted, as though trespassing upon sacred ground? Or did he feel the opposite, that he was closer to God than the priests who forbade him? For in understanding creation so deeply, he may have believed he was glimpsing the Creator's hand. This ambiguity, reverence or rebellion, is the heartbeat of his mystery. It is why scholars argue even today, was Leonardo a devout man, encoding divine secrets, or a quiet skeptic encoding dangerous doubts? The bedtime tone settles again, soothing yet charged. We are reminded that these drawings, made in secrecy, were not meant for the eyes of his contemporaries. They were whispers to the future, whispers that reached us centuries later, carrying both awe and questions. Did he hope we would find them, or did he believe they would remain forever hidden? The thought lingers like candle smoke in a vaulted chamber. Finally, the section pivots gently. Having traced Leonardo's dissections, his search for the essence of life, we now prepare to move outward again, from flesh to symbol, from hidden anatomy to the coded imagery of his religious works. For if he could encode mysteries in muscles and veins, could he not also encode them in paint and pigment, within the holy commissions of his patrons? What secrets might lie veiled within halos, within gestures, within the very icons meant to represent the sacred? Thus the narrative flows naturally, carrying us from the silent body to the silent canvas, where Leonardo's deepest messages may yet wait, disguised as devotion. There are paintings that greet the eye with clarity, saints glowing in gold, Madonnas serenely enthroned, biblical stories rendered in bright colors for all to see. And then there are the works of Leonardo da Vinci, which do not greet, but rather whisper. They draw the viewer into shadow, into ambiguity, into a twilight where every gesture seems deliberate, every rock, every fold of fabric, every glance loaded with secrets. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the Virgin of the Rocks. At first glance, it is a devotional image, the Virgin Mary, the infant Christ, an angel, and the young John the Baptist gathered within a grotto. Yet upon longer viewing, something unsettles. Why are they not beneath heaven's open sky, but instead enclosed in a cavern, a place of concealment, a place long associated with hidden rituals? Why do their gestures form triangles of secrecy, pointing not to God above, but to mysteries below? And why in both versions of this painting, for Leonardo painted too, do subtle alterations hint at meanings never fully revealed? The shadows of the grotto itself set the tone. Unlike the radiant Madonnas of his contemporaries, Leonardo shrouds the Holy Family in geological mystery. Stalactites hang above, pools shimmer below, jagged rocks encircle the figures, as if they are held within the earth's womb rather than the heavens. It is as if the Virgin herself is not only a mother but a veil, concealing a deeper birth, one not only of Christ, but of knowledge, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The religious commission demanded a scene of biblical reverence, yet Leonardo gave them a landscape that whispers of alchemy, of hidden chambers, of worlds beneath the visible. The question arises, was this deliberate? Was he embedding forbidden ideas in plain sight, trusting only the attentive to notice? The gestures deepen the puzzle. The Virgin extends her hand in a protective yet ambiguous motion, hovering above John the Baptist. The angel, meanwhile, points unmistakably across the composition, his finger a compass directing the viewer's eye, not toward heaven, not toward Mary, but toward the infant John. Christ, unusually, is depicted in a position of apparent passivity, blessing yet not commanding. The hierarchy feels inverted, destabilized, as though Leonardo was suggesting a hidden order beneath the official story. Was he hinting at alternative readings of Scripture, whispers of suppressed Gospels that told of Christ and John as twinned, destinies, mirrors of one another? For centuries, theologians and art historians have debated this ambiguity, yet the mystery lingers unsolved. And then there is the angel's gaze. Unlike most depictions where angels look heavenward or toward the holy, Leonardo's angel looks directly at us. It is as if the figure is not part of the scene, but a participant in the secret, inviting the viewer into knowledge too dangerous to proclaim openly. That gaze is a summons, one that says, look closer, question the surface. There is more here than devotion. Why would Leonardo veil such defiance beneath biblical imagery? Perhaps because art was his safest language. Patronage demanded the holy, the acceptable, the sanctioned. But within those expectations, A mind like Leonardo's could weave subtleties, insert riddles. The Virgin's veil becomes his veil, sheltering forbidden thoughts within folds of accepted devotion. Beneath the surface of piety, shadows of rebellion stir. One might even imagine Leonardo smiling faintly as he painted, knowing that his commissioners would see a Madonna, while future eyes might glimpse something else entirely. The grotto setting itself carries deeper resonance. In esoteric traditions, stretching back to antiquity, caves and grottos were places of initiation. From the mysteries of Mithras to Platonic allegories of shadows, the cave symbolized hidden truth, the womb of wisdom concealed from the unprepared. Was Leonardo, steeped in classical learning and perhaps touched by secret brotherhoods, choosing this setting intentionally? Was he suggesting that the Virgin herself is the guardian of hidden mysteries, her grotto not simply a backdrop, but an initiation chamber? The thought lingers, uncomfortable yet compelling. Even the flora and rocks that fill the composition demand scrutiny. Leonardo, ever the scientist, painted plants with near-botanical precision. Yet in the Virgin of the Rocks, these plants are not random. Many carry symbolic associations, healing herbs, alchemical motifs, emblems of hidden knowledge. The rocks themselves are carved into unnatural forms, cradling the figures as though nature itself is conspiring in secrecy. Nothing in Leonardo is accidental. Each detail, from a fold of cloth to a plant in shadow, feels placed with deliberation. If one reads them symbolically, the painting begins to resemble a coded manuscript, a puzzle disguised as devotion. The tone of this section of the documentary grows reverent yet questioning. Imagine standing before the painting in the Louvre, the gallery hushed, the figures before you glowing dimly in their cavern. The Virgin's face is serene, but her serenity feels knowing, as though she is aware of what lies behind the veil of appearance. The angel's gaze meets yours, intimate and unsettling, and the cave around them seems to whisper, "Truth lies not in the open sky, but here, beneath, in darkness." It is a message not of denial but of concealment, as though Leonardo painted both for the faithful and for those who sought something beyond faith. Some scholars propose that Leonardo's alterations between the two versions of the Virgin of the Rocks reveal an evolving code. The London version differs subtly from the Paris original. Gestures shift, expressions soften, details are adjusted. Was Leonardo refining a message, calibrating secrecy according to circumstance? Or was he negotiating between the demands of patrons and his own veiled intentions? Each difference feels less like correction and more like recalibration, as though he were tuning the resonance of his hidden melody. But what if the Virgin herself is not only a figure of worship, but also a metaphor? In Christian iconography, Mary is often called the seat of wisdom, the vessel through which divine knowledge enters the world. Leonardo, who saw knowledge as the highest pursuit, may have painted her as a symbol of hidden truth itself. The veil she wears, the grotto she inhabits, the shadows she gathers around her, all might suggest that wisdom, like divinity, is veiled, hidden, requiring patient seekers to pierce the darkness. Thus, the Virgin is not only Mother of Christ, but Mother of Mystery. The narration lingers on this possibility, inviting the audience to feel the unease. What if the most famous painter of devotion was quietly encoding doubt? What if beneath the folds of piety lay a man who questioned Scripture, who saw in myths and symbols not divine decrees, but layered allegories pointing to older, hidden truths? This does not make Leonardo an enemy of faith, but perhaps a seeker of something deeper, a truth older than dogma, broader than doctrine, whispered in caves and grottos long before churches were built. His paintings, then, are not betrayals, but bridges, art that satisfies devotion while carrying within it seeds of questioning. From this point, the flow of the documentary moves naturally toward legacy. For if Leonardo encoded defiance beneath sacred imagery, then what did he hope to achieve? Was he leaving messages for future generations, trusting that his own world was not ready to receive them? Was he placing codes like seeds in soil, awaiting centuries of growth before they could bloom into comprehension? The Virgin's veil thus becomes a metaphor for time itself, a covering drawn across truth, until the right eyes, the right minds, the right centuries could part it. And here, the narrative invites reflection on the very nature of secrecy. To hide is not always to deceive, sometimes it is to protect. The alchemist spoke of hiding wisdom from the unworthy, of veiling mysteries lest they be profaned. Perhaps Leonardo too felt that his insights, whether about scripture, the cosmos or the body as were not yet safe, so he placed them beneath a veil, beneath layers of paint and shadow. He gave the world beauty, while offering whispers to the future. The Virgin's face thus becomes the face of secrecy itself, calm, radiant, but impenetrable. As the section closes, the tone grows meditative, preparing for the transition to the final arc. Leonardo's paintings, particularly the Virgin of the Rocks, leave us with questions that echo into silence. Was he merely obeying patronage, or was he daring to smuggle forbidden thoughts into Holy Commission? Was the grotto merely a landscape, or was it an initiation chamber? Was Mary only the Virgin Mother, or also the guardian of veiled knowledge? The answers remain beyond reach, hidden behind centuries of paint and silence. Yet the mystery is the point. The Virgin does not reveal, she veils, and in that veil Leonardo's genius resides. Thus we are carried forward, toward his legacy, toward the codes he left scattered like breadcrumbs through art, notebooks, and memory. What do they mean for us today? What secrets remain still hidden beneath layers of time? The Virgin turns, her face serene and quiet, as though she knows but will not say. The grotto deepens, the shadows lengthen, and the path ahead leads not to resolution, but to wonder. The end of Leonardo da Vinci's life does not arrive with thunder or spectacle, but with stillness. After decades of restless work, unending experiments, and images that seem to hide entire universes within them, his last years unfold quietly. In France, under the patronage of King Francis I, the young king adored him, treating him not as a mere artist but as a sage, a living treasure of knowledge. Leonardo was given a manor at Clou near Amboise, with gardens, assistants, and space to dream. Yet by then his body betrayed him. His right hand grew weak, his health faltered, and his days of great commissions slipped behind him. And so the old master, who had once dissected corpses by candlelight, engineered impossible machines and painted visions that unsettled entire cities, now sat among his manuscripts, sketching, annotating, revising, almost as if he were conversing with the silence that awaited him. But this silence was not emptiness, it was deliberate. His notebooks, filled with codes, mirrored handwriting, and scattered fragments, were not the work of a man trying to be understood easily. They were the work of a man who knew that some things were too dangerous, too fragile, or perhaps too precious to hand over openly to his age. Leonardo had spent his life threading secrets beneath surfaces. His paintings disguised riddles within religious commissions. His anatomical studies veiled discoveries in cryptic diagrams. His notebooks, perhaps more than any painting, embody this legacy of silence. Thousands of pages once existed, filled with drawings of flying machines, hydraulics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, even jokes and recipes. Yet when he died in 1519, they did not pass smoothly into public view. Instead, they scattered. Assistants inherited some. Collectors hoarded others. Kings locked them away in secret archives. Some were catalogued, many were forgotten, and others simply vanished, their whereabouts unknown even now. What we call Leonardo's notebooks today are only fragments, scattered leaves of a vast forest, scraps of what once might have been the most astonishing manuscript ever written by human hands. This scattering was not accidental. It was part fate, part choice, and part design. Leonardo wrote in ways that seemed to resist clarity. He used mirror script, a handwriting reversed, so that it could only be read with reflection. He jumped between subjects within the same page, a sketch of a bird in flight next to a calculation of water pressure, a joke beside a plan for a cathedral dome. He left thoughts unfinished, diagrams unlabeled, conclusions unwritten. It is as though he built his notebooks to be labyrinths, not books but puzzles. One cannot simply read Leonardo. One must search, decode, and reconstruct. The silence is not absence but challenge. Why? Why would the greatest mind of the Renaissance veil his thoughts in such difficulty? One reason may have been fear. In an age where heresy could bring flames to write too openly of forbidden anatomy, celestial mechanics, or doubts about scripture was to risk everything. Another reason may have been pride. Leonardo once wrote that knowledge should be for those who earn it. To him, truth was not a commodity to be consumed, but a treasure for the worthy. Silence was his test. Only those patient enough, curious enough, and determined enough would unlock his meaning. His legacy was not to hand humanity his discoveries, but to force humanity into pursuit. The manuscript's journey after his death only deepens this mystery. Some fell into the hands of King Francis himself, treasured but inaccessible. Others traveled to Spain, where they lay largely ignored for centuries. The Codex Leicester, with its astonishing reflections on water, ended up in the library of the Earl of Leicester before vanishing into private collections, only to resurface centuries later. Today it rests with a modern collector, Bill Gates, as though even now Leonardo's work belongs less to the public than to scattered guardians. Many codices disappeared entirely, last seen in dusty archives before vanishing into the folds of history. Were they destroyed? Or are they still out there, slumbering in forgotten libraries, awaiting rediscovery? The silence of their absence is itself part of Leonardo's code. This silence is heavy. When we look at his extant notebooks, we feel the weight not only of what is there, but of what is missing. Whole volumes of anatomy gone, whole sequences of inventions lost. Perhaps the secrets most dangerous, most challenging, were the very ones that never reached us. What if Leonardo deliberately ensured that certain discoveries would fade, entrusted, only to whispers scattered across Europe in pieces impossible to reunite? His genius may not only have been in creating knowledge, but in controlling its survival. He may have designed his legacy as an unfinished puzzle, one humanity could never fully solve. The tone of this chapter turns almost funereal. Imagine Leonardo, an old man, sitting by candlelight in his manor at Clue, his hands shaky yet still sketching. Around him are piles of pages, some bound, most loose, fragments of decades of thought. He must have known death was near. Did he feel urgency to organize them, or was his scattering intentional? Did he will his notes into obscurity, knowing that too much light too soon could destroy their meaning? Silence, after all, was his greatest companion. From youth to old age, Leonardo had been an observer more than a talker, a man who saw everything, but said little, a man who wrote endlessly yet rarely published. His true audience was not his contemporaries, but the future. And yet silence is fragile. For centuries, scholars pored over his surviving codices, often misreading them, sometimes dismissing them. Even today, many of his ideas remain half understood. His inventions reconstructed with guesswork, his notes translated with uncertainty. Some historians glance past symbols that ordinary eyes, once opened, cannot unsee. A gesture in a painting overlooked as decorative, a diagram dismissed as incomplete. A phrase mistranslated, its ambiguity dissolved by modern impatience. Leonardo's silence is not only in what he hid, but in what we fail to hear. The veil remains not simply because he placed it, but because we too often rush past it. This is why his legacy feels so haunted. The silence surrounding his work is not the silence of loss, but the silence of a presence just out of reach. His missing texts and scattered notebooks are not merely absent. They are felt, like a shadow in the corner of a room, like the echo of a voice that just stopped speaking. To read Leonardo today is to hear gaps, pauses, ellipses. It is to realize that he has forced us into dialogue with silence itself. As the documentary lingers on these images, the old man in France, the scattered notebooks, the hidden codices, the audience feels not only awe, but melancholy. This was a man who could have changed the world centuries before its time. He foresaw flying machines, submarines, plate tectonics, even aspects of evolution. And yet he revealed so little. His silence slowed the pace of human discovery, but perhaps preserved something greater: mystery. For if he had told us everything plainly, perhaps we would have consumed it, misused it, or ignored it. Instead, by veiling his knowledge, he ensured it would haunt us, challenge us, and lure us into deeper searching for centuries. So why did Leonardo choose silence? Was it humility, knowing that truth cannot be possessed by one age alone? Was it arrogance, guarding his discoveries for only the most worthy? Or was it something else, a philosophy of knowledge itself, in which the pursuit matters more than the possession? Perhaps his greatest code was not in a notebook or painting at all, but in the very way he taught us to look, to see beyond the surface, to notice details others ignore, to dwell in ambiguity, to embrace the silence that surrounds truth. And so, as Leonardo's life draws to its close, the film takes on a tone of hushed reverence. The manner of Clue fades into dusk. The old master rests among his pages, and silence stretches across centuries. But the silence is alive. It is filled with absences that whisper, gaps that invite, riddles that unsettle. Leonardo da Vinci left us not a legacy of clarity, but of shadows. His silence was not an end, but a doorway. Through it, he taught us that the greatest code is not what we find on the page, but the transformation that occurs when we learn to look differently at reality itself. This prepares us for the final descent into the ultimate question: what if Leonardo's greatest masterpiece was not Mona Lisa, not the Last Supper, not even his codices, but the silence itself? What if his true code was the shift he forced upon the human gaze, from surface to depth, from certainty to wonder? In this silence his legacy lives on. The 15th chapter begins not with an answer, but with a silence. A silence so deep it feels like a cathedral without bells. A silence so heavy it bends the air like the pause before a storm. We are no longer wandering through Florence's alleys or Milan's refectories. Instead, we stand in a vast gallery of memory, its walls lined with Da Vinci's visions. His mirrored script glimmers faintly like silver threads. His sacred geometries hover as invisible scaffolds. His portraits blink from shadowed corners as though alive. The voice of the documentary lowers, slows, becomes dreamlike. We are in the corridor of the unresolved, where every brushstroke, every figure, every curve of ink leads not to closure, but to something stranger. This is not merely a life lived centuries ago. This is a code still pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the skin of our own time. The mirrored script is the first to greet us, lines upon lines written backwards, as though Leonardo meant his thoughts for the eye of a mirror rather than the eye of man. At first glance it looks playful, even eccentric, like a habit of someone who loved puzzles. But now, standing at the end of our journey, it feels heavier, darker, deliberate. Why cloak one's thoughts in this reversed veil? To prevent theft? To protect secrets from the gaze of the uninitiated? Or perhaps to remind us that knowledge itself is a mirror, reflecting back only what we are prepared to see. Leonardo's handwriting thus becomes more than a script. It becomes a metaphor, a philosophy. Perhaps the code was not in the words, but in the act of reversal itself, a gesture teaching us that truth hides in inversion. We move onward, and the Vitruvian man comes into view. The circle and square, the limbs extended outward, the figure simultaneously human and divine, mathematical and mystical. For centuries, scholars have measured proportions, calculated ratios, traced the golden mean within his diagrams. Yet, what if the true message was not mathematical perfection, but a silent reminder that man himself is the cipher? That the body, with its veins and breath, its mystery and mortality, is the key Leonardo offered, but only in fragments. Standing before the Vitruvian man today is to feel watched by geometry itself. The lines are not merely drawn, they whisper. Then comes the Last Supper. Centuries of analysis hover around it like a storm of moths. Missing chalices, unusual gestures, possible musical scores, heresies coded in silence. Yet here, at the corridor's end, we do not see answers, we see intent. Leonardo painted the moment after betrayal is revealed, a moment of tension, of frozen hands and unreadable faces. Perhaps he wanted us to notice the absence of the chalice, not because it was missing, but because it was too obvious, too dangerous to show. Silence itself becomes the message. If words betray, if images can be misread, then perhaps silence is the truest code, a silence that has endured for 5 centuries. We pass to Mona Lisa. She does not smile. Not anymore. Her lips curve, yes. But what was once interpreted as serenity now appears like containment. She knows something, something beyond us, something beyond her painted prison. Eyes that follow, landscapes that distort into maps, initials that shimmer faintly like ghosts in her pupils. The longer we stare, the more uneasy we become. Not because we fail to understand her, but because perhaps she understands us. Leonardo has inverted the gaze. The code here is not what lies within the painting, but what the painting awakens in the observer. Mona Lisa is less an answer and more a test. What do you see? What does your mind reveal when it confronts mystery? The code refuses to die because it has been placed inside us. The pages of war engines unfold next. Tanks, cannons, siege devices, inventions that could have changed history, yet riddled with flaws, impossibilities, illusions. Why? Was Leonardo disguising brilliance behind error? Or was he playing with the very idea of destruction, sketching weapons not to arm princes, but to warn them of their own thirst for violence? The silence here is chilling, a silence of intent, machines that might have existed but did not, codes hidden not in what was built, but in what was withheld. Above, sketches of wings, flying machines like ribs of angels, flapping contraptions, spirals of air. Leonardo studied birds, but he also studied transcendence. To rise above gravity was not only a dream of mechanics, but a dream of spirit. His wings whisper, "Man longs for heaven, but must earn it through understanding, not through presumption." His code of flight was never meant to be solved in wood and cloth. It was meant to survive as yearning. The human heart has always looked upward. That is the code that does not die. Anatomy comes next. Not just drawings of bones and muscles, but dissections done in candlelight, bodies opened where the church forbade. Leonardo mapped the hidden rivers of the flesh, veins and chambers, lungs and wombs. But he also searched for what could not be seen, the spark, the breath, the soul. His dissections were not acts of desecration, but of reverence. The body became scripture, the human form a text written in tissue and light. His silence here is profound. He does not claim to find the soul, but neither does he deny it. He draws closer, then lets silence fall as though some mysteries must remain untouched. The Virgin emerges from grotto shadows in the Virgin of the Rocks. Biblical figures arranged with unsettling gestures, children pointing strangely, caves echoing with ambiguous light. Religious scenes twisted into riddles. Leonardo veils truth. Beneath devotion, hides symbols beneath piety. Was he honoring scripture or rewriting it with codes only the initiated could read? The Virgin's veil does not only cover her head, it covers Leonardo's intent. The silence here is not absence, it is concealment. And then, the end of life. Leonardo in France, an old man surrounded not by armies or courts, but by pages. Pages scattered, fragmented, dispersed to kings, collectors, libraries. Some preserved, some lost, some locked away in vaults. His legacy is not a book, not a painting, not a singular monument. It is fragments, silence woven through paper. Knowledge that feels incomplete, deliberately incomplete. The silence of choice. What did he destroy before his death? What did he hide, knowing humanity was not ready? These questions echo louder than any answer. At last the corridor narrows. We see all the works once more. The mirrored script, the Vitruvian geometry, the Last Supper's frozen hands, Mona Lisa's unblinking eyes, the weapons that were never built, the wings that never flew, the dissections that searched for the soul, the Virgin's shadowed grotto, the lost manuscripts drifting like ghosts. Each fragment hums like a string, and together they form a music we cannot quite hear, a harmony just beyond our ears. The code is not in one work, it is in the web between them, And because the web has no center, it cannot die. The voice of the documentary slows further now, hypnotic. What if Leonardo never wanted us to solve his mysteries? What if his goal was the opposite, to plant seeds that ensure we never stop searching? A riddle unsolved is more powerful than an answer given, an eternal code that forces each generation to look, to question, to wonder. The mirrored script, the strange geometries, the veiled figures, the missing texts, all of it may have been designed not to end, but to continue. The weight grows. The silence becomes unbearable. The code refuses to die because it was never meant to be solved. It was meant to survive, to outlive its maker, to haunt humanity with the hunger of curiosity. Leonardo's true masterpiece, perhaps, was not a painting, not an invention, not a notebook, but a question that has never left us. A question painted in silence. And so we return to the works once more. Mona Lisa watching, The Last Supper whispering, Vitruvian Man balancing between earth and heaven. Their silence is no longer absence, it is language, a language without translation, a code that will never rest. The section ends with a long pause, a cinematic breath. The screen lingers on Da Vinci's gaze from a self-portrait, eyes burning with secrets he never spoke. The narration whispers, perhaps the greatest code is not in what he left behind, but in what he forced us to become, seekers forever searching. The corridor fades, the silence remains, the code refuses to die. Leonardo da Vinci lived 5 centuries ago, yet his presence feels strangely close, as though his spirit has never left the world. His works do not sit silently in museums, they breathe, pulse, and watch. There is something in his brushstrokes, in the quiet folds of his sketches, in the mirrored scroll of his notebooks that seems alive. Something that refuses to fade into the past. Perhaps this is why Leonardo haunts us still, because he did not simply paint what was visible or sketch what could be measured. He painted and drew the hidden currents beneath reality itself, visions that could not be confessed aloud, truths that could not safely be written, questions that no one dared to voice. In this way, his art became more than art. It became a vessel, a cipher, a code that still whispers across the centuries, daring us to listen. Our journey through his world has felt like walking in dimly lit corridors, every shadow containing the suggestion of a secret. We began in Florence, among streets that still echo with the footsteps of guilds, scholars, and heretics alike. We turned the mirrored pages of his notebooks, where words ran backward like private spells meant to be read only by those who knew the trick of reflection. We traced the divine proportions of the Vitruvian Man, discovering that for Leonardo, geometry was not only mathematics, but theology, a bridge between human form and cosmic order. Each revelation guided us deeper, each mystery opening into another, until the works themselves began to feel less like paintings and more like messages sent into eternity. The Last Supper greeted us in silence, an unfinished banquet where the central chalice was missing. Gestures hung like frozen signals, and whispers suggested that the canvas contained more than faith alone. Some heard music hidden in the composition, others discerned heresies buried beneath the surface. What was clear, however, was that Leonardo's silence spoke louder than sound. Then came the Mona Lisa, her faint smile both haunting and magnetic, an expression at once welcoming and unyielding, as though she knew a secret we were not yet worthy to hear. Scholars pointed to initials in her eyes, landscapes shaped like maps, and even the possibility of dual identities. Yet her true enigma was not in any single theory. It was in the way she watched us back, asking questions we could not answer. The journey led us into the sketches, the grotesque dissections of human flesh, the impossible machines, the dreamlike contraptions of war and flight. Here, Leonardo seemed both ahead of his time and outside of it, drawing not only to invent but to conceal. Some sketches were impractical by design, as though he had hidden his true knowledge within deliberate flaws. Others hinted at books we can no longer find, lost manuscripts, suppressed codices, pages swallowed by history, or buried in archives where light seldom reaches. Were these absences accidental, Or were they the result of careful, deliberate silence? Whispers of brotherhood followed, rumors of secret societies that may have entrusted Leonardo with wisdom stretching back to Egypt, Greece, or beyond. The notion of a hidden order guarding forbidden knowledge may be little more than legend, yet something in his work seems to resonate with this possibility. His portraits and unfinished works hinted at invisible patterns, landscapes that mirrored real geographies, faces marked with subtle insignias. Even his war machines carried silence, puzzles within gears and levers that seemed designed not only to destroy, but to mislead. The same man who drew death also drew flight, wings spread like prayers, machines that felt like metaphors for transcendence. His fascination with birds was not mechanical alone, it was spiritual, as though he longed for humanity itself to rise into the forbidden heavens. And then came the body, the anatomy of mystery. Leonardo's dissections were forbidden by the church, yet he pressed onward, sketching muscles, veins and organs with terrifying precision. But he was not merely cataloguing flesh. He seemed to be searching for something beyond, perhaps even the seat of the soul. His drawings, suspended between science and the sacred, reminded us that to know the body too well was to risk challenging doctrines that demanded mystery remain untouched. It is here that Leonardo's silence felt most dangerous. The Virgin. Of the rocks carried us deeper into this tension, sacred figures cloaked in shadows that seemed less biblical than conspiratorial. Hands gestured in ways that felt coded, grottos stretched like hidden chambers, and holy figures bore a strange, unsettling defiance. Was Leonardo, beneath the piety of religious commissions, quietly embedding symbols that only a few would notice? Was the Virgin herself a veil, not of purity, but of forbidden knowledge concealed within the language of faith? As his life closed in France, Leonardo's silence deepened. The old master sketched still, but fragments scattered after his death, traveling through kings, collectors, and secret archives. Some manuscripts vanished, others resurfaced centuries later, and each discovery seemed less like a revelation and more like a reminder of how much remains missing. It is here, in the absences, the lost texts, the ignored symbols, the overlooked anomalies, that the weight of his silence presses hardest. Perhaps Leonardo himself intended this. Perhaps he wanted knowledge to slip into shadow, to fade into whispers rather than into shouts. And so we arrive at the question that lingers still. What if Leonardo's greatest code was never in his notebooks, never in the brushstrokes of his paintings, never even in the intricate geometry of his diagrams? What if his code is not a solution at all, but an invitation, a way of forcing humanity to see differently, to question what lies beneath the surface of reality? Every mystery we uncovered led not to certainty but to deeper doubt, and perhaps that was his plan all along. What does this mean for us today in an age overflowing with information, where truths can be accessed instantly, yet feel more fragile than ever? Maybe Leonardo understood something timeless, that truth, when spoken too plainly, can be destroyed, twisted, or silenced. But truth disguised as riddle, truth embedded in beauty, truth hidden within silence, this kind of truth survives. It survives not by being solved, but by being endlessly sought. We imagine now the Mona Lisa's smile not as an answer, but as a locked door, the gestures of the Last Supper as frozen signals awaiting ears attuned to hear them, the sketches of flight as blueprints of dreams meant for a future Leonardo himself would never see. Each is a fragment of a puzzle without an ending, a whisper from a past that refuses to die. And as the lights dim on his legacy, we begin to realize that the true code has never been in the art alone. It is within us, in our hunger to find, meaning our unwillingness to accept surfaces, our restless urge to seek what lies beyond the veil. Perhaps this is why historians hesitate to call his mysteries real, not because they are false, but because they demand too much. To acknowledge them is to admit that we are still children in the shadow of his mind, barely beginning to glimpse what he set in motion. Leonardo da Vinci left us not answers, but a challenge, to never be satisfied with easy truths, to look deeper, to listen harder, to question endlessly. And so the voice lowers now, calm, almost a whisper, as though speaking not to the mind but to the soul. 5 centuries ago, a man painted mysteries into silence. Tonight they still speak, and tomorrow, if we listen carefully, they always will.